Some men are broken by loss. Others are buried by it. Caleb Monroe was both. A ghost walking his own land, haunted by the wife he couldn't save, and paralyzed by a love he was terrified to feel again. But when a stranger from Boston stepped off the train with nothing but a worn suitcase and impossible hope, everything he'd sworn to never risk again came crashing back. This is their story, of fire and second chances, of walls built high and hearts brave enough to tear them down. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The Montana wind had teeth. It came down from the mountains cold and sharp, cutting across the high plains like a blade nobody could see but everyone felt. It rattled the shutters of the Monroe ranch house, whistled through the gaps in the barn walls, and carried with it the smell of sage and dust and something deeper, something that tasted like endings. Caleb Monroe stood on his porch in the thin light of dawn, one hand gripping a coffee cup gone cold, the other braced against the weathered post that held up the overhang. He was 34 years old and looked 50. The lines around his eyes had nothing to do with squinting into the sun and everything to do with the weight of memories he couldn't put down. 2 years. 2 years since Anna died, and the ranch still felt like a graveyard. Behind him, through the half-open door, he could hear his daughter Rose moving around the kitchen. 6 years old now. Growing up without a mother. Growing up with a father who'd forgotten how to be anything but numb. "Papa?" Her voice was small, careful. She'd learned not to push him. "I'm here, Rosie. Aunt Clara says breakfast is ready. Tell her I'll be in." He wouldn't be, they both knew it, but the ritual of pretending mattered, so he said the words anyway. The sun crept higher, painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful, if a man had the heart to notice. Caleb just saw another day, another stretch of hours to fill with work hard enough to make him too tired to think. The ranch was dying. Oh, it wasn't obvious yet. Not to someone passing through. The fences still stood. The barn still had its roof. The cattle still grazed the south pasture, though there were fewer of them than there'd been last year, and fewer still than the year before that. But Caleb could feel it the way a man feels a wound going septic. The rot was setting in, not in the wood or the wire, but in him. And without him, the ranch was just land and lumber waiting to return to dust. "You can't keep doing this." He turned. Clara stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded him so much of Anna it made his chest ache. She was his sister-in-law, his late wife's younger sister, and she'd moved in after the funeral to help with Rose. 2 years of watching him fade. Doing what? This. Standing out here like you're waiting for the world to end. Skipping meals. Barely speaking. Rose needs... I know what Rose needs. Do you? Claire's voice was sharp, but her eyes were soft. Because from where I'm standing, she needs a father who's present, who sees her, who doesn't look right through her like she's another ghost in this house. The words hit harder than she probably intended. Caleb looked away, back toward the mountains, toward anywhere that wasn't his sister-in-law's knowing gaze. I'm doing my best, Clara. I know you are. She moved closer, her voice gentler now. But your best isn't enough. Not anymore. This place needs more than one man running himself into the ground. Rose needs more than a father who's half here. And you... She paused, choosing her words carefully. You need more than this slow death you're living. Anna's been gone 2 years. I'm not looking to replace her. I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to live again. Caleb shook his head, draining the last of his cold coffee. I've got work to do. Caleb. But he was already moving down the steps and across the yard toward the barn, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Behind him, he heard Clara sigh, then the sound of the door closing softly. The barn was dim and cool, smelling of hay and leather and horse sweat. Caleb saddled his gelding, a big bay named Timber, with the automatic efficiency of a man who'd performed the task 10,000 times. His hands knew the work even when his mind was somewhere else, always somewhere else. He rode out to check the fence line along the northern property, a job that needed doing but also gave him an excuse to be alone. The ranch sprawled across nearly 1,000 acres of Montana rangeland, good grazing country when the rain came, hard country when it didn't. This year had been dry. The creek that fed the south pasture was running thin, and the grass was shorter than it should be. Just another problem on a long list of problems. Caleb worked through the morning, replacing rotted posts and tightening wire, his muscles falling into the familiar rhythm of labor. This was the only time he felt close to normal, when his body was too busy to let his mind wander into the dark places it liked to go. But even hard work couldn't hold back the memories forever. Anna. She'd been small and fierce, with dark hair that curled when it got humid and a laugh that could light up a room. They'd married young, built this ranch together from scratch, and for 8 years they'd been happy. Genuinely, impossibly happy. The kind of happy that made other people jealous. And then she got pregnant with Rose, and the happiness turned complicated, turned frightening. Her body wasn't built for childbearing, the doctor had told them as much. But Anna was stubborn. She wanted the baby, wanted to be a mother more than she wanted to be safe. "We'll be fine," she'd told Caleb, her hand on her swelling belly, her eyes bright with certainty. "We're going to have a beautiful daughter, and she's going to grow up on this ranch, and we're going to be fine." She was right about 2 out of 3. Rose was born on a freezing January night in 1880, and she was beautiful, perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs that could wake the dead when she cried. Anna hemorrhaged 3 hours later and died before dawn. Caleb had held his newborn daughter in one arm and his wife's cooling hand in the other, and something inside him had simply stopped. Some essential part of him that knew how to hope, how to plan, how to believe in tomorrow. It died with Anna in that cold bedroom, and he'd been walking through the world half alive ever since. "Papa!" Rose's voice, distant but urgent, cut through his thoughts. Caleb looked up from the fence post he'd been staring at without seeing and spotted her running across the field toward him, her braids flying behind her, Clara following at a more measured pace. His first thought was panic. Something was wrong. Someone was hurt. He swung up onto timber and rode to meet them, his heart hammering in a way it rarely did anymore. "What's wrong? What happened?" Rose reached him, breathless and flushed, and grabbed his stirrup with both hands. "Nothing's wrong, Papa. Nothing's wrong. But Aunt Clara says—" She paused to gulp air. "Aunt Clara says we're getting a letter from Boston, from a real lady who wants to come live with us." Caleb's gaze snapped to Clara, who had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "We need to talk," she said. They talked in the kitchen, or rather, Clara talked, and Caleb listened with mounting disbelief, his hands flat on the table, his jaw so tight it ached. "You did what?" "I placed an advertisement," Clara repeated, her voice calm, maddeningly calm, "in several Eastern newspapers, for a mail-order bride, without asking me. If I'd asked you, you would have said no." "Damn right I would have said no." Caleb shoved back from the table, the chair legs scraping loud against the wooden floor. "What in God's name were you thinking?" "I was thinking about Rose." Clara's composure cracked slightly, heat entering her voice. "I was thinking about this ranch falling apart. I was thinking about you killing yourself one day at a time because you're too stubborn to admit you can't do this alone. So you advertised for a wife like I'm shopping for livestock. I advertised for help, for someone who could bring life back to this house. And yes, Caleb, someone who could be a mother to Rose and a partner to you if you'd pull your head out of your—" "Aunt Clara said a bad word," Rose whispered loudly from her spot in the corner, where she was supposedly playing with her doll but was obviously listening to every word. Clara closed her eyes briefly. "Rose, honey, go outside for a minute. But now please." The little girl went, casting worried glances over her shoulder. When the door closed behind her, the kitchen fell into tense silence. Caleb gripped the back of his chair. "You had no right. I had every right. I'm the one who's been here, Caleb, every day, watching you disappear, watching Rose try so hard to be good and quiet because she's afraid of making you sadder. Someone had to do something. And you thought importing a stranger from halfway across the country was the solution? I thought it was a start." Clara pulled a letter from her apron pocket, the paper worn soft from repeated reading. "This came 3 days ago. I've read it a dozen times, and I think you should read it too, before you decide." Caleb stared at the letter like it might bite him. "I've already decided." "Read it anyway, please. If not for yourself, then for Rose." That was a low blow, and they both knew it, but it worked. Caleb snatched the letter from Clara's hand and unfolded it, his eyes scanning the neat feminine handwriting with a mixture of anger and something else he refused to name. Dear Mrs. Winters, my name is Evelyn Hartwell, and I am writing in response to your advertisement in the Boston Evening Transcript. I must confess, I have never considered answering such a notice before, but something in your words struck a chord within me. You wrote of a widower in need of help, of a little girl in need of a mother's care, and of a ranch in need of a woman's hand. I find myself in a position where I, too, am in need, though perhaps of a different sort. I am 26 years old, unmarried, and alone in the world save for a few distant cousins who tolerate my existence more than welcome it. I have worked as a teacher and a seamstress, and while I am not wealthy, I am not without skills. I can read and write, keep accounts, cook, sew, and manage a household. I am healthy and strong, though I realize that means little until tested by the rigors of frontier life. I will not pretend this decision is without fear. I am a city woman through and through, and Montana might as well be the moon for all I know of it. But I have learned that fear and necessity often walk hand in hand, and I find myself in a place where the life I have been living no longer fits. If your family is willing to take a chance on me, I am willing to take a chance on Montana. I ask only for honesty about what is expected, what is offered, and what kind of life I might find at the end of a very long train journey. I await your reply, and I hope this letter finds your household well. Respectfully, Miss Evelyn Hartwell. Caleb read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it on the table. He felt Clara watching him, weighing his reaction. Well? She asked quietly. She sounds desperate. She sounds honest. Same thing, in this case. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. Clara, I can't. I'm not ready for this. I may never be ready for this. I know. Her voice was gentler now. But ready or not, something has to change. This house needs more than I can give it. Rose needs more. And whether you want to admit it or not, so do you. What did you tell her in your reply? Clara had the grace to look slightly guilty. I told her she was welcome to come, that we'd pay her travel expenses, that there was a place for her here, and that we'd discuss arrangements once she arrived. Arrangements. I didn't promise anything, Caleb. I just opened the door. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. You opened the door to a stranger, someone who doesn't know me, doesn't know this place, doesn't know what she's getting into. Then maybe you should write to her yourself, tell her the truth. Let her decide if she still wants to come. Caleb looked out the window toward the mountains. The sun was higher now, burning off the morning chill, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear Rose singing to herself. A made-up song about horses and wildflowers and things a 6-year-old found beautiful. His daughter, his ranch, his life, such as it was. When does she arrive? He asked finally. 3 weeks. The train comes through Dry Creek Station on the 15th. 3 weeks. It felt like both forever and no time at all. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of too much work and not enough sleep. Caleb threw himself into the ranch with renewed intensity, as if he could outrun the knowledge of what was coming by sheer force of labor. He repaired every fence that needed repairing and some that didn't. He cleared brush, mucked stalls, branded cattle, and rode out before dawn and didn't come back until after dark. Rose asked him twice when the lady from Boston was coming, and both times he grunted something non-committal and changed the subject. Clara stopped pushing. She just watched him with knowing eyes and prepared the house. The ranch house wasn't large, 4 rooms downstairs, 2 up. Anna's sewing room, which had sat untouched since her death, became the guest room. Clara aired it out, changed the linens, and hung fresh curtains in the window. She baked bread every other day and made sure there were wildflowers on the kitchen table. You're making it nice for her, Caleb observed one evening, his tone flat. I'm making it welcoming, Clara corrected. There's a difference. This place has felt like a tomb for 2 years, Caleb. It's past time for that to change. He wanted to argue, but he was too tired. Instead, he just nodded and went to bed, where he lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about Boston or letters or the fact that in less than a week, his life was going to change in ways he couldn't control. The night before Evelyn Hartwell was due to arrive, Caleb couldn't sleep at all. He paced the length of his bedroom, then gave up and went downstairs. The house was dark and quiet. everyone else asleep. He built up the fire in the kitchen stove, more for something to do than because he was cold, and then he sat at the table with his head in his hands. What the hell was he doing? He'd agreed to meet a woman he didn't know, who was coming to Montana because she answered an advertisement his sister-in-law had placed without his knowledge or permission. A woman who was probably expecting what? A husband? A life? Some kind of frontier romance? All he had to offer was a failing ranch, a grieving child, and a heart that felt like it had been replaced with stone. "You're not going to sleep tonight, are you?" He looked up. Clara stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her hair down around her shoulders. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I've been awake too." She came into the kitchen, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from him. "You're terrified." It wasn't a question, so he didn't answer. "It's all right to be terrified," Clara continued softly. "What you're doing, what we're all doing, it's terrifying. Letting someone new into your life, into Rose's life, into this house that still feels like it belongs to Anna." "It does belong to Anna," Caleb said roughly. "It always will." "I know, but Anna's gone, Caleb, and the living still need to live." He wanted to argue, wanted to say that he was living, that he got up every morning and worked and took care of Rose and kept the ranch going, and wasn't that enough? But looking at Clara's gentle, persistent face, he knew it wasn't. "What if I can't do this?" The words came out before he could stop them. "What if I can't feel anything? What if she comes all this way, and I'm just empty?" Clara supplied quietly. He nodded. "Then you'll be empty, and maybe that's all you can be right now. But Caleb, you don't have to marry her tomorrow. You don't have to marry her at all, if it doesn't feel right. Just give her a chance. Give yourself a chance. See what happens when you stop trying so hard to feel nothing. And if I hurt her, if she comes here expecting something I can't give, then you'll be honest with her. And she'll decide what she wants to do. But that's her choice, Caleb, not yours to make for her." He sat with that for a while, listening to the fire crackle and pop in the stove. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters, that same restless Montana wind that never seemed to stop. "I'm going to meet her train tomorrow," he said finally, "but I'm not making any promises. I'm not asking for promises." Clara reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "I'm just asking you to show up. The rest will take care of itself." Yes. Dry Creek Station was barely worthy of the name. It consisted of a single platform, a water tower for the locomotives, a tiny office where the station master worked, and not much else. The town itself, such as it was, lay a half-mile down the road, a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses. Population maybe 200 on a good day. Caleb rode in with Clara and Rose in the wagon, the three of them silent as the morning sun climbed higher. Rose sat between them, her best dress ironed and her hair braided with ribbons, fidgeting with nervous excitement. "What if she's beautiful?" Rose asked for the third time that morning. "Then she'll be beautiful," Clara said patiently. "What if she doesn't like me?" "She'll like you, sweetheart. How could she not?" "What if Papa doesn't like her?" That one hung in the air unanswered. Caleb focused on the road ahead, his hands tight on the reins. The train was late, which was nothing unusual. Schedules in Montana Territory were more like polite suggestions than actual commitments. They waited on the platform while the sun beat down, and Rose swung her legs, and Clara made small talk with Mrs. Henderson from the general store. Caleb stood apart, his hat pulled low, trying to ignore the curious looks from the handful of other people waiting. Everyone in Dry Creek knew everyone else's business, and by now they'd all heard that the Monroe widower was expecting a mail-order bride from back east. "Train's coming," someone shouted. Caleb heard it then, the distant whistle, the growing rumble of the locomotive. His stomach tightened. Last chance to leave. Last chance to turn around and ride back to the ranch and tell Clara this was all a terrible mistake. But Rose was jumping up and down with excitement, and Clara was smoothing her skirts and checking her hair, and then the train was pulling in with a great hiss of steam and squeal of brakes, and it was too late. Too late for everything. The passengers began disembarking. A cattleman Caleb recognized, a salesman with a sample case, an older couple who looked lost. And then her. Evelyn Hartwell stepped down from the train car with one hand gripping a worn carpet bag and the other clutching her hat against the wind. She was not what Caleb had expected. Not beautiful exactly, though not plain either, somewhere in between. She had light brown hair pulled back in a simple knot, a pale blue traveling dress that had seen better days, and eyes that scanned the platform with something that looked like equal parts hope and terror. When her gaze found Clara, who was waving, her face transformed. She smiled, and the smile was genuine, and Caleb felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. "Miss Hartwell," Clara called, hurrying forward with Rose in tow. "Welcome. Welcome to Dry Creek." Evelyn's smile wavered slightly as she took in the ramshackle station and the empty prairie beyond, but she rallied quickly. "Mrs. Winters, I'm so glad to finally meet you. Please, call me Clara. And this—" Clara gestured to Rose, who was suddenly shy, half hiding behind Clara's skirts. "This is Rose." "Rose." Evelyn crouched down, bringing herself to eye level with the little girl. "What a beautiful name for a beautiful girl. I'm Evelyn. I've come a very long way to meet you." "From Boston?" Rose whispered. "From Boston. Have you ever been to Boston?" Rose shook her head. "Well, it's very big and very loud and has far too many buildings squished together. I think Montana is much nicer already." That coaxed a small smile from Rose, and Caleb saw some of the tension leave Evelyn's shoulders. Then Clara turned, drawing Evelyn's attention to where Caleb stood a few feet away, frozen and useless. "Miss Hartwell, this is my brother-in-law, Caleb Monroe." "Caleb, Miss Evelyn Hartwell." Evelyn straightened and turned to face him. Up close, he could see the dust of travel on her dress, the fatigue around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bag. She looked tired, scared, and absolutely determined not to show it. "Mr. Monroe," she extended one gloved hand. "Thank you for allowing me to come." Caleb stared at her hand for a beat too long before remembering his manners. He shook it briefly. Her grip was surprisingly firm, and then dropped it like it burned. "Ma'am." It came out gruff, almost harsh. He saw her flinch slightly and cursed himself. "Welcome to Montana." "Thank you." Her voice was quiet but steady. I hope I can be of some help to your family." He had no idea what to say to that. A dozen responses crowded into his mind, none of them appropriate. Finally, he just nodded and turned toward the wagon. "We should get going. It's a long ride back to the ranch." Behind him, he heard Clara apologizing in a low voice. "He's not usually so brusque, just nervous." And Evelyn's soft reply, "I understand. This is strange for all of us." Strange didn't begin to cover it. The ride home was awkward. Rose chattered away, asking Evelyn 1,000 questions about Boston and trains, and whether she'd seen the ocean, and Evelyn answered them all with patient good humor. Clara joined in when she could, keeping the conversation flowing. Caleb drove in silence, acutely aware of Evelyn sitting behind him, acutely aware of how small she seemed in the vast Montana landscape, acutely aware of the fact that he'd just invited a stranger into his home and had no idea what came next. When they finally pulled up to the ranch house, he saw Evelyn take it in, the weathered boards, the sagging porch rail he kept meaning to fix, the bare yard with more dust than grass. Not much to look at, especially compared to whatever she'd left behind in Boston. "It's lovely," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. Clara beamed. "Come inside, you must be exhausted. I've prepared a room for you, and there's supper almost ready." They went inside, Rose still holding Evelyn's hand, and Caleb was left to unhitch the horses and stable them. He took his time, in no hurry to go back inside and face whatever came next. By the time he did finally go in, the sun was setting and the kitchen was full of the smell of Clara's cooking. Evelyn had changed out of her traveling dress into something simpler, and she was helping Clara set the table while Rose showed her a rag doll she'd made herself. It was domestic, normal, and it made Caleb's skin crawl with the wrongness of it, because the last time a woman other than Clara had stood in that kitchen, it had been Anna. And Anna was dead, and this stranger had no right to stand in her place. He almost turned around and walked back out. But then Evelyn looked up and saw him, and something in her expression, something vulnerable and hopeful and terrified, stopped him cold. "Supper's ready," Clara said brightly. "Caleb, sit down. You too, Miss Hartwell." Please, just Evelyn." They sat. They ate. Clara and Rose kept up a steady stream of conversation while Caleb focused on his plate and Evelyn answered questions and tried not to look as overwhelmed as she clearly felt. After supper, Clara took Rose upstairs to bed, leaving Caleb and Evelyn alone in the kitchen for the first time. The silence stretched out, awkward and heavy. Evelyn was the one who broke it. "I want to thank you," she said quietly, "for allowing me to come. I know you didn't ask for this." Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her eyes. She knew. She knew this was Clara's doing, knew he was less than thrilled, knew she was intruding on grief and a life that didn't have room for her. "Clara means well," he said finally. "I'm sure she does. But I also know I'm a complication you didn't need, so I want to propose something, if I may." He waited. "Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks to prove I can be useful here. I'll help with the house, with Rose, with whatever needs doing. I won't ask for anything or expect anything, and at the end of 2 weeks, if you want me to leave, I'll go. No hard feelings, no obligations. And if you want to leave before then?" A small, sad smile crossed her face. "Then I'll tell you, I've made a long journey, Mr. Monroe, but I'm not in the habit of staying where I'm not wanted." He should have felt relief. She was offering him an easy out, a way to end this before it really began. But instead, he felt something else, something that might have been respect. "All right," he said. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, she echoed. They shook on it, formal as a business arrangement because that's what it was. A trial period, a test, nothing more. Caleb told himself that anyway, as he excused himself and went up to his own room. He told himself that all through the night, lying awake in the darkness, listening to the wind and thinking about the woman sleeping in Anna's sewing room. Just 2 weeks. He could survive 2 weeks, and then everything would go back to the way it was before, the way it was supposed to be. Empty. Morning came too soon and brought with it the stark reality of a stranger in the house. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, strong and dark, and the sound of voices drifting up from the kitchen. For one disoriented moment, still caught in the web of sleep, he thought it was Anna down there, humming while she worked. Then full consciousness returned, cold and brutal, and he remembered. Not Anna. Never Anna again. He dressed slowly, reluctant to go downstairs and face whatever new dynamic awaited him. Through his window, he could see the sun just breaking over the eastern hills, painting everything gold. Another beautiful morning in a place that had stopped feeling beautiful 2 years ago. When he finally made his way down, he found the kitchen transformed. Not in any dramatic way. The furniture was all the same, the walls hadn't been repainted, but something was different. Brighter, maybe. More alive. Evelyn stood at the stove, her hair already pinned up despite the early hour, an apron tied around her waist. She was flipping flapjacks with the easy competence of someone who'd cooked for herself for a long time. Clara sat at the table with Rose, both of them watching Evelyn with expressions of surprised approval. "Good morning," Evelyn said when she noticed him. Her voice was carefully neutral, testing the temperature of his mood. "I hope you don't mind. Clara said I should make myself useful, and breakfast seemed like a good place to start." Caleb grunted something that might have been a greeting and poured himself coffee. The cup was hot in his hands, the steam rising in lazy spirals. He took a sip and nearly choked. It was good. Better than good. Better than anything Clara made, though he'd never tell her that. "You like it strong," Evelyn observed. Not quite a question. "I do. So did my father. He always said weak coffee was an insult to the beans." It was a small offering of connection, a glimpse into her past, and Caleb didn't know what to do with it, so he just nodded and sat down at the table, letting the conversation flow around him while he drank his coffee and tried not to notice how naturally Evelyn moved through Anna's kitchen. Breakfast was flapjacks and bacon and eggs, fresh from the henhouse. Rose ate with enthusiasm, telling Evelyn a long, rambling story about a bird she'd seen yesterday. Evelyn listened like it was the most important story she'd ever heard, asking questions and making small comments that kept Rose talking. Caleb watched despite himself. Watched the way Evelyn's face softened when she looked at his daughter. Watched the way Rose leaned into her attention like a flower turning toward the sun. watched and felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or resentment, or something he didn't want to name. After breakfast, Clara declared it was time to show Evelyn around the property. Caleb excused himself, muttering something about fences that needed checking, and headed for the barn before anyone could object. He needed space, needed air, needed to not watch a stranger make herself at home in his house. But when he emerged from the barn with timber saddled and ready, he found Evelyn waiting by the corral fence, her fancy Boston dress replaced by something more practical, a simple skirt and shirtwaist that Clara must have lent her. "Clara said you were riding out to check the fences," she said. "I was hoping I might come along, if that's all right." It wasn't all right. The whole point of riding out was to be alone, but Clara was watching from the porch with Rose, and refusing would make him look like the bastard he was already feeling like. "You ride?" he asked instead. "Not well, but I can stay on a horse if she doesn't do anything too ambitious." Despite himself, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Almost a smile, but not quite. "I'll saddle Daisy for you. She's old enough to have forgotten what ambitious means." 10 minutes later, they were riding out together across the morning bright prairie, and Caleb was wondering what kind of fresh hell he'd agreed to. Evelyn sat her horse well enough, though she held the reins too tight, and her posture was stiff. City riding, he thought. Probably learned in some park where the horses were more furniture than animal. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the steady thud of hoofbeats. Caleb kept his eyes on the horizon, hyper-aware of the woman riding beside him and determined not to show it. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said finally, her voice quiet but clear. "I didn't expect it to be this beautiful." Caleb glanced at her. She was looking around with something like wonder, taking in the endless roll of grass and sage, the mountains purple in the distance, the sky so big it seemed to swallow everything. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something harsher, I suppose, more barren. The pictures in the newspapers always make the West look so empty." "It is empty. That's the point." "No." She shook her head, still looking around. "Empty means nothing. This is full, just full of different things than Boston." He wanted to dismiss the observation as romantic nonsense from someone who'd been here less than a day, but there was something in the way she said it, thoughtful, precise, that made him pause. They reached the north fence line, and Caleb dismounted to examine a section where the wire had come loose. Evelyn dismounted too, less gracefully, and stood watching him work. "Can I help?" "Not unless you know how to splice wire." "I don't, but I could learn." He paused, glancing up at her. She looked serious, not challenging him, not trying to prove anything, just genuinely offering to learn. "It's dirty work," he said. "You'll ruin that borrowed dress. Clothes can be washed. Skills are harder to come by." Something about that struck him as sad. The idea that this woman had crossed half a continent to a place where every skill she'd learned in Boston, teaching, sewing, whatever city accomplishments she'd accumulated, might count for nothing. Where she'd have to learn everything from scratch just to be useful. "All right," he heard himself say. "Come here, I'll show you." She came closer, careful not to spook the horses, and Caleb found himself explaining the work in a way he hadn't explained anything in years. How to thread the wire, how to twist it tight, how to test the tension so it wouldn't sag. His hands showed her what his words couldn't quite convey, and she watched with fierce concentration, asking smart questions that proved she was actually listening. "Like this?" She took the wire from him, her fingers working carefully. "Tighter. It needs to hold against cattle leaning on it." She adjusted her grip, put more strength into the twist. "Better?" "Better." They worked their way down the fence line together, Caleb repairing and Evelyn watching and occasionally helping when he needed an extra pair of hands. The sun climbed higher, and the morning warmed, and gradually, so gradually he almost didn't notice, the tight knot of tension in his shoulders began to ease. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said after a long stretch of comfortable silence. Caleb's guard went back up immediately. "Depends on the question." "Clara mentioned that Rose was 6. That means she was born 2 years ago, January." His voice went flat. "My wife died in childbirth." "I'm sorry." Everyone said that. "I'm sorry." Like the words meant something. like they could change anything. Life happens, he said, harsher than he intended. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Death happens too. It doesn't make it hurt less." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw understanding in her face. Not pity, he would have hated pity, but actual understanding, like she knew what it meant to lose something you couldn't get back. "You lose someone?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. "My parents, when I was 19. Typhoid, within 3 days of each other. My father went first, then my mother just gave up, like she couldn't stand to be in the world without him." She paused, her hand still on the fence wire. "I think grief is like that sometimes. It's not just sadness, it's a kind of homesickness. Being sick for a home that doesn't exist anymore." The words hit Caleb square in the chest. Homesickness. Yes, that was exactly what it felt like he'd been exiled from his own life and could never find his way back. "I'm sorry," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "Thank you." Evelyn finished the wire splice she'd been working on and stepped back. "How's that?" He tested it, pulling hard. It held. "That's good. You're a fast learner." A smile flickered across her face, there and gone. "I'll take that as high praise from a Montana rancher. Don't let it go to your head. Wouldn't dream of it." They rode back to the ranch house in a silence that was somehow less oppressive than before. Not comfortable, exactly, but no longer actively painful. Caleb found himself studying Evelyn from the corner of his eye. The way she sat the horse with growing confidence, the way she tilted her face up to catch the sun, the small, satisfied smile that suggested she was pleased with herself for learning something new. She was trying. He'd give her that. Trying hard, in fact, to fit into a life that must seem completely alien to everything she'd known. When they got back, Clara had lunch waiting, and Rose had drawn a picture, a house, and 3 stick figures that she proudly labeled Papa, Aunt Clara, and Miss Evelyn. "You made me very tall," Evelyn observed seriously, studying the drawing. "I like that. In real life, I'm rather short." "You can be tall in pictures," Rose said with the impeccable logic of a 6-year-old. "Pictures can be whatever you want." "That's very wise. Did you come up with that yourself?" Rose nodded importantly. "Papa says I'm clever." "Your papa is right." Caleb felt Clara's eyes on him and knew what she was thinking. "See? This isn't so bad. She's good with Rose. She's trying. Give her a chance." But giving someone a chance meant opening a door he'd nailed shut, and he wasn't sure he remembered how. The afternoon passed in a blur of chores. Evelyn helped Clara with the washing, then spent an hour in the kitchen garden pulling weeds and learning which plants were vegetables and which were just determined Montana wildflowers. Rose followed her around like a devoted puppy, chattering away, and Evelyn listened to all of it with the patience of a saint. Caleb watched from a distance while he worked on repairing a broken stall door. Watched and tried not to think about how right it looked. This woman and his daughter bent over the garden together, their heads close, as Rose pointed out a beetle on a tomato leaf. By the time supper rolled around, he was exhausted. Not from the work. He could work from dawn to midnight without breaking a sweat. Exhausted from the effort of holding himself apart, of maintaining the walls he'd built so carefully over the past 2 years. They ate Clara's beef stew and fresh bread, and then Rose begged Evelyn to tell her a story. "What kind of story?" Evelyn asked. "A Boston story, about the city and all the buildings and the ocean." So Evelyn told her about Boston, about buildings so tall they seemed to touch the sky, about streets crowded with people and horses and streetcars, about the harbor where ships came in from all over the world bringing tea and silk and spices. She made it vivid and alive, her voice painting pictures, and Rose listened with wide eyes. Even Caleb found himself listening, drawn in despite himself. When was the last time he'd heard a story? When was the last time he'd thought about anything beyond the borders of this ranch? After Rose was tucked into bed, Claire excused herself to work on some mending, leaving Caleb and Evelyn alone again. They sat at the kitchen table, the lamp burning low between them, moths batting against the window screen. "Thank you," Caleb said abruptly, "for being patient with Rose. She's had a hard couple of years." "She's wonderful," Evelyn said simply. bright and curious and so full of life. You should be proud. I am. I just don't always know how to show it. She knows. Children always know, even when we think we're hiding things from them. He wanted to ask what else Rose knew, whether his daughter could see how broken her father was, whether she blamed him for not being enough. But the questions felt too raw, too honest, so he kept them locked inside. Tomorrow, he said instead, I've got to ride out to check the south pasture. The creek's been running low. If you want to come, you can. Learn more about the ranch. It wasn't quite an invitation, more like a grudging acknowledgement that she was here and might as well understand what she'd gotten herself into. But Evelyn smiled like he'd offered her something precious. I'd like that. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. It's a long ride and it gets hot. I'll manage. He believed her. This woman who'd crossed half a continent on her own, who'd answered an advertisement from strangers and trusted her future to people she'd never met. She'd manage. She was stronger than she looked. That night, lying in his bed in the dark, Caleb admitted to himself that maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be the disaster he'd anticipated. Maybe Clara had been right. Not about everything, not about him being ready for anything like marriage or partnership or whatever the hell this arrangement was supposed to become. But right about the house needing something it hadn't had in a long time. Right about Rose needing more than a father who was half ghost. Right about the ranch needing hands that knew how to give care instead of just taking orders. Downstairs, he heard the floorboards creak as someone moved through the house. Evelyn, probably, unable to sleep in this strange new place, surrounded by silence so different from the city noise she was used to. He heard water running in the kitchen, soft footsteps, then silence again. 2 weeks, he reminded himself. That was the deal. 2 weeks to see if this could work. He could give her that much. He owed Clara that much. He owed Rose that much. Whether he owed himself anything was a question he wasn't ready to answer. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of Montana summer day where the sun felt like a physical weight pressing down on everything. Caleb was up before sunrise, as always, but when he came downstairs, he found Evelyn already in the kitchen, coffee made, dressed in riding clothes that Clara must have altered for her overnight. You're up early, he said. Habit. I've never been good at sleeping late. She poured him coffee without asking, already learning his morning routine. Are we still riding out to check the south pasture? If you're sure you want to, it's going to be a hot one. I'm sure. They set out after breakfast, Rose waving goodbye from the porch with Clara. The ride was longer than yesterday's fence check, taking them across the heart of the ranch toward the creek that fed the south grazing land. Caleb pointed out landmarks as they went. The old lightning-struck tree that marked the property line, the rocky outcrop where wolves sometimes denned, the place where he'd found 2 calves tangled in brush last spring. Evelyn listened and asked questions. Good questions, the kind that showed she was trying to understand not just the geography, but the logic of the place. Why cattle grazed here and not there. How water moved through the landscape. What made good rangeland versus poor? You're thinking about this, Caleb observed. Of course I am. If I'm going to be here, I should understand how it works. Most women wouldn't care about pasture management. She gave him a look. Not quite sharp, but close. Most women you've known, perhaps. But I'm not most women, Mr. Monroe. I'm a woman who needs to earn her keep, which means learning what needs to be known. He couldn't argue with that. When they reached the South Creek, his fears were confirmed. The water was barely a trickle, running thin and sluggish over rocks that should have been submerged. The cattle were clustered at the remaining deep spots, more animals than the water could comfortably support. This is bad, Evelyn said quietly. This is Montana in a dry summer. Always a risk, but some years are worse than others. What do you do when the water runs out? Drive the herd to better grazing. Sometimes that means leasing land from neighbors. Sometimes it means selling off cattle you'd rather keep. He dismounted, walked down to the creek bed, crouched to test the water with his hand. Still cool, at least. Still good, just not enough of it. Evelyn dismounted too and came to stand beside him. How much longer will it last? Week, maybe 2 if we're lucky, then we'll have to make decisions. We? He glanced up at her, realized what he'd said. We, like she was part of this. Part of the decision-making, the worry, the weight of keeping the ranch alive. Figure of speech, he said gruffly, standing up. But Evelyn didn't look convinced. And truthfully, neither was he. They rode back slowly, conserving the horses in the heat. Halfway home, they stopped to rest in the shade of a cottonwood grove, letting the animals drink from a small spring. Caleb shared the lunch Clara had packed, bread and cheese and apples, and they ate in companionable silence, listening to the wind in the leaves. "Can I ask you something personal?" Evelyn said finally. Caleb tensed. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Fair enough." She took a breath. "Clara's letter mentioned you weren't looking for a wife, that this was her idea, not yours. So I'm wondering, what exactly are you looking for? What would make these 2 weeks a success, from your perspective?" It was a fair question, a smart question, and it deserved an honest answer, even though honesty felt like skinning himself alive. "I don't know," he admitted. "I know what Clara wants. Someone to help with Rose, to help with the house, to bring some kind of life back to this place. And I can see the value in that. I can see that you're good with my daughter, that you're willing to work, that you're not as out of place here as I thought you'd be. But I'm not looking for a wife, Evelyn. I had a wife. I loved her. She died, and that part of me died with her. I don't have it in me to feel that way again." She was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "I'm not asking you to feel anything, Caleb. I'm not asking you to love me or even like me. I'm asking for a place to be useful, a place to belong, that's all. And if that's all it ever is, if I can't give you more than that, then that's what it is." She met his eyes steadily. "I came here knowing the situation. I'm not a young girl with romantic fantasies about frontier life and dashing cowboys. I'm a 26-year-old woman who understands that sometimes the best we can hope for is usefulness and respect. If you can offer me that, and if I can offer it back, then maybe that's enough." It was the most brutally honest thing anyone had said to him since Anna died. No platitudes, no false hope, just clear-eyed acknowledgement of what was and wasn't possible. "You deserve more than that," he found himself saying. "Maybe. But we rarely get what we deserve, do we? We get what we can build from the materials we have." She stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Should we head back? Clara will worry if we're gone too long." They rode home in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Not comfortable exactly, but honest. Like they'd established the terms of something, drawn a map of the territory they were both navigating. When they got back to the ranch, Rose ran out to meet them, full of news about a butterfly she'd caught and released in a cake Clara was baking. Evelyn listened to all of it with genuine interest, and Caleb felt something in his chest ease slightly. Maybe this could work. Not the way Clara hoped, not with romance and remarriage and happy endings, but in its own way. As a practical arrangement between two people who understood loss and were trying to build something from the ruins. That evening, after supper, Evelyn asked if she could look at the ranch accounts. Caleb was surprised enough to agree, spreading the ledgers out on the kitchen table while Clara supervised Rose's bath upstairs. Evelyn studied the numbers with the same focused attention she'd given to fence mending and pasture management. After a while, she looked up. "You're not in trouble yet, but you're heading that way." "I know." "The expenses are stable, but the income is dropping. Fewer calves sold this year than last, and at lower prices. Market's been soft, and we lost animals to the hard winter. What about diversification? Are there other income streams you could develop?" He stared at her. "Other income streams?" "Yes. Could you raise horses as well as cattle? Sell hay to neighboring ranches? Take in livestock for grazing at a fee?" She tapped the ledger. "My father ran a shop in Boston. One of the first things he taught me was never to depend on a single source of income. When times get hard, having options makes the difference between surviving and going under." It was good advice. Smart advice. The kind of thinking Caleb hadn't had the mental energy for in 2 years of just trying to survive day by day. "I'll think about it," he said. "Think hard, because if the creek stays dry and you have to sell off cattle at a loss, you'll need something to fall back on." She said it matter-of-factly, not criticizing, just stating what she saw. And what she saw was clear-eyed and accurate in a way that both impressed and unsettled him. "You're good with numbers," he said. I had to be. After my parents died, I managed their estate settlement myself. Learned quickly that if you don't understand money, money understands you, and not in a kind way. Another glimpse into her past. Another piece of the puzzle that was Evelyn Hartwell. This woman who seemed soft, but was actually steel wrapped in calico. The week progressed, and Evelyn settled into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She woke early and went to bed late, always finding something useful to do. She helped Clara with the endless cooking and cleaning, but she also ventured beyond the house, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, learning to milk the cow, even mucking out stalls when the hired hand who came twice a week didn't show up. She read to Rose every night, teaching the little girl her letters and numbers through stories and songs. She mended clothes with stitches so tiny and perfect they were almost invisible. She experimented with recipes, making do with what they had on hand and somehow producing meals that made even Caleb's scarred heart feel something close to contentment. And she asked questions, constant questions, about everything: the weather patterns, the cattle breeds, the neighbors, the market prices, the history of the ranch. Like she was building a complete picture of the world she'd entered, leaving nothing to chance or assumption. By the end of the first week, Caleb caught himself looking for her when she wasn't around, wondering what she thought about things, valuing her opinion in a way he hadn't valued anyone's opinion in years. It scared him. That slow softening, that gradual letting down of his guard. On Sunday, Clara insisted they all go to church in Dry Creek. Caleb hated church, hated the pitying looks, the whispered condolences that never stopped even 2 years later, the way everyone treated him like broken glass that might shatter at any moment. But Evelyn needed to meet people, Clara argued, needed to start building connections in the community if she was going to stay. And when she said if, her eyes held a message. Make this work, Caleb. For Rose's sake, if not your own. So they went. All 4 of them in the wagon, dressed in Sunday best, looking for all the world like a normal family. The church was small, 20 pews, a simple altar, windows that stuck in summer and leaked in winter. Reverend Marsh was a good man, earnest and kind, who'd presided over Anna's funeral with compassion that Caleb had barely registered through his fog of grief. When they walked in, heads turned, conversations paused. Caleb felt the weight of every eye, felt the curiosity and speculation, and his jaw went tight. But Evelyn just smiled, gracious and poised, as Clara introduced her around. This is Miss Evelyn Hartwell, visiting from Boston. She's helping with Rose and the household. Visiting, helping. Careful words that didn't commit to anything. The women clustered around Evelyn, eager for new blood in their small community. Mrs. Henderson from the general store, Mrs. Yates, who ran the boarding house, young Mary Sullivan, who taught at the tiny schoolhouse. They peppered her with questions. Where was she from? How did she like Montana? How long would she stay? And Evelyn answered them all with charm and tact, giving nothing away. Caleb sat in the back pew with Rose between him and Clara, only half listening to Reverend Marsh's sermon about patience and faith. His attention kept drifting to Evelyn 3 rows ahead, sitting straight-backed and attentive, her borrowed hat slightly askew. After the service, as people mingled outside, Tom Henderson approached Caleb. Tom ran the general store with his wife and had known Caleb since they were both boys. She seems nice, Tom said without preamble. The lady from Boston. She is. Clara tells my Sarah that Miss Hartwell might be staying on. That true? Maybe. We're figuring it out. Tom nodded slowly. Good. Good for you, Caleb. Past time you let some light back into that house. Caleb wanted to snap that it was none of Tom's business, that his life and his grief and his choices were his own. But Tom meant well. They all meant well. And maybe that was the problem. Everyone's so concerned with his happiness that they couldn't see he'd forgotten what happiness even felt like. On the ride home, Rose fell asleep against Clara's shoulder, worn out by excitement and socializing. Evelyn was quiet, looking out at the passing landscape with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. That was overwhelming, she said finally. The church ladies are eager for gossip. You're the most interesting thing to happen in Dry Creek since the Yates barn burned down. A small smile. I gathered that. They're very friendly, though. Welcoming. They're curious. Once the novelty wears off, they'll move on to the next thing. Is that what I am? A novelty? He glanced at her, heard the genuine question beneath the light tone. I don't know what you are yet. Fair enough. I don't know what I am either. Back at the ranch, Clara took Rose inside for a nap while Caleb unhitched the horses. Evelyn came to help him without being asked, learning the routine, doing more than her share. Your neighbors seem to think we're courting, she said as they worked. Let them think what they want. It might complicate things. If expectations get set that we can't meet. He looked at her across his horse's back. What expectations are those? Marriage, a conventional arrangement. People see a widower and a single woman under one roof, they assume certain things. People assumed things about me for 2 years. I stopped caring what they thought a long time ago. But I have to live here too, and women get judged more harshly for unconventional arrangements. She was right, and they both knew it. In Boston, maybe things were different, but in Montana territory, appearances mattered, reputation mattered, and an unmarried woman living with a man, even with his sister-in-law present, would eventually cause talk. So what do you want to do? He asked. She was quiet for a moment, running her hand down the horse's neck. I think we should be honest with each other about where this is going. We have 1 more week on our 2-week trial. At the end of that week, we need to make a decision. Either I leave or we formalize this arrangement somehow. Formalize. Marriage, Caleb. I'm talking about marriage. She met his eyes squarely. Not for love or romance or any of the things people usually marry for, but for practical reasons. To give me a legal place here, to give Rose a mother figure, to stop the gossip before it starts. A partnership based on mutual benefit and respect. His heart hammered against his ribs. That's not fair to you. Why not? I'd have a home, a purpose, a child to care for. Those are things I want, things I need. And if I can never give you more than that, if I'm never the husband you deserve, then you'll be the husband I have, and we'll make it work. Or we won't, and we'll adjust accordingly, but at least we'll have tried something instead of giving up before we start. It was terrifying. It was practical. It made a horrible kind of sense. 1 more week, Caleb said. Let's get through 1 more week. Then we'll talk about this again. All right, 1 more week. They finished with the horses in silence, but Caleb's mind was racing. Marriage. To a woman he barely knew. A woman he didn't love and probably couldn't love. A woman who was asking for almost nothing except the chance to be useful. Was that enough? Could it be enough? He didn't know. But as he watched Evelyn walk back toward the house, her head high and her step sure despite everything she'd given up to be here, he thought maybe, just maybe, she was brave enough for both of them. And maybe that counted for something after all. The second week began with thunder. Not the crashing, violent kind that split the sky and brought rain, but the low, distant rumble that promised storms but never quite delivered. Montana in drought was like that. All threat and no follow-through, the clouds building and building until they towered like mountains, then sliding away to torment some other piece of prairie. Caleb stood on the porch in the pre-dawn darkness, watching lightning flicker along the horizon and feeling the air thick with humidity that would burn off by noon. Behind him, through the kitchen window, he could see lamplight and movement. Evelyn was up, as she always was now, starting the coffee and the day with a quiet efficiency that had become as much a part of the ranch's rhythm as sunrise itself. 10 days. She'd been here 10 days, and already he couldn't quite remember what the mornings had been like without her. That thought should have terrified him. Instead, it just made him tired. Tired of fighting against something that might actually be good for everyone except his stubborn, grief-locked heart. Storm's not going to break, Evelyn said from the doorway. She'd appeared so quietly he hadn't heard her, and when he turned, she was holding 2 cups of coffee, offering one to him like it was the most natural thing in the world. How do you know? The wind. It's blowing from the west. Storm clouds need to come from the south to drop rain here. Clara told me. She took a sip of her own coffee, her eyes on the distant lightning. False hope is worse than no hope at all, I think. At least with no hope, you know where you stand. There was something in her voice, a weariness that matched his own, and Caleb found himself studying her profile in the weak light. She looked tired, not physically worn down, though the work was hard and the hours long. Tired in a deeper way, like the weight of uncertainty was pressing on her the same way it pressed on him. "You sleeping all right?" he asked. She glanced at him, surprised by the question. "Well enough. The quiet takes some getting used to. In Boston, there was always noise, carriages, voices, factory whistles. Here, the silence is so complete it almost feels loud." "You miss it? The city?" "Parts of it. The bookshops, the libraries, the way you could walk down a street and see 100 different lives happening all at once." She paused. "But I don't miss the loneliness. Strange thing, being lonely in a city full of people. At least here, when I'm alone, there's a reason for it." Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just drank his coffee and watched the false storm fail to materialize. After a while, Evelyn went back inside to start breakfast, and he stayed on the porch until the sun came up, turning the sky from black to gray to gold. Clara cornered him later that morning while Evelyn was outside with Rose, teaching her how to identify different wildflowers. "4 more days," Clara said without preamble. Caleb looked up from the saddle he was oiling. "I can count, Clara. 4 more days until your 2-week trial is up. 4 more days to decide whether you're going to let that woman stay or send her back to Boston with nothing." "I'm aware." "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you've spent the last 10 days watching her prove herself over and over, and you still look like a man trying to find reasons to say no." "Maybe I am." "Why?" Clara's voice sharpened. "Give me one good reason why Evelyn Hartwell shouldn't stay. One reason that isn't about Anna or your grief or your stubborn determination to punish yourself for the rest of your life." "That's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair, Caleb. It wasn't fair that Anna died. It wasn't fair that Rose grew up without her mother. It wasn't fair that you got left behind with more pain than one person should have to carry. But that doesn't mean you get to stop living. And it doesn't mean you get to make everyone around you stop living too." The words hit like physical blows, and Caleb felt his temper flare. "I'm not stopping anyone from—" "Yes, you are. You're stopping Rose from having a mother. You're stopping this ranch from having the help it desperately needs. And you're stopping Evelyn from having the home and purpose she came here looking for. All because you're too afraid to let go of your grief long enough to see what's right in front of you." "I'm not afraid." Clara laughed, but it was a sad sound. "You're terrified. You're terrified that if you let yourself care about Evelyn, even a little, it means you're betraying Anna. You're terrified that if you let someone new into your heart, it might survive. And you've gotten so used to feeling dead inside that being alive again seems like the worst thing that could happen." Caleb stood up, the saddle forgotten. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I watched my sister die too, Caleb. I grieved her just like you did. The difference is I didn't let that grief turn me into a ghost. Anna wouldn't want this for you. She wouldn't want Rose growing up with a father who's only half present. She wouldn't want this ranch falling apart because you're too stubborn to accept help. And she sure as hell wouldn't want you throwing away a good woman because you think suffering is the same as loyalty. Anna was my wife. And she's gone. Gone, Caleb. And no amount of guilt or grief or refusing to move forward is going to bring her back." Clara's voice broke slightly. "I miss her too. Every single day. But she's not here, and we are. We're still here. And we have to figure out how to keep going. Evelyn is offering you a way to do that. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it." She left him then, walking back toward the house with her shoulders squared and her head high. Caleb stood in the barn, hands shaking slightly, feeling like he'd been flayed open. The truth was, Clara was right. About all of it. He was afraid. Afraid of forgetting Anna, afraid of dishonoring her memory, afraid of letting someone else matter because once you let someone matter, they could be taken away, and he didn't think he could survive that kind of loss twice. But he was also afraid of what would happen if he kept living like this. Half dead, half present, slowly watching everything he'd built with Anna crumble into dust because he didn't have the strength or the heart to maintain it alone. That afternoon, while Clara napped and Rose played quietly with her dolls, Caleb found Evelyn in the kitchen garden. She was on her hands and knees, pulling weeds with fierce concentration, her face flushed with heat and effort. She'd long since abandoned any pretense of staying clean. Her borrowed dress was dirt-stained, her hands filthy, her hair coming loose from its pins. She looked up when his shadow fell across her, shading her eyes with one dirty hand. "Something wrong?" "No, Can we talk?" Something in his tone made her immediately serious. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, and followed him to the shade of the cottonwood tree at the edge of the yard. They sat on the bench Caleb had built years ago, back when Anna was alive and the world made sense, and for a moment neither of them spoke. 4 more days, Evelyn said finally, until we have to decide. I know. Have you thought about what you want? Really thought about it? Caleb stared at his hands, work-roughened, scarred, capable hands that knew how to fix fences and birth calves and build things, but had forgotten how to reach for another person. I've thought about nothing else. And I think Clara's right. I think you should stay. I think we should make this official, legal, so there's no question about your place here. The words came out stiff, formal, nothing like what someone should say when proposing marriage. But I need you to understand something first. I'm listening. I can't promise you anything beyond partnership and respect. I can't promise that I'll ever feel more than that. My wife, Anna, she took a part of me when she died, and I don't know if that part grows back. I don't know if I'm capable of loving someone that way again. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. Can I tell you something? All right? When my parents died, I thought my life was over. I was 19, alone, with no family that wanted me and no prospects beyond working myself to the bone just to survive. For years, I was so angry. Angry at them for leaving me, angry at God for taking them, angry at myself for not dying with them. She paused, picking at a loose thread on her skirt. Eventually, the anger faded. It had to. It was eating me alive from the inside. And what I was left with was this hollow space where my old life used to be. I had to decide what to fill it with. I could fill it with bitterness and isolation, or I could fill it with purpose and connection, even if those things looked different than what I'd imagined for myself. What are you saying? I'm saying I understand that you can't give me the kind of love you gave Anna. I'm not asking for that. What I'm asking for is the chance to build something new from the pieces we both have left. A partnership, yes. Respect, yes. But also the freedom to care about each other without it having to be romance or grand passion. Just 2 people choosing to face the world together instead of alone. Caleb looked at her then, really looked, and saw something in her face that made his chest ache. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile, too easily broken. This was something sturdier, determination maybe, or faith in the possibility that broken things could still be useful. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. We're both adults who've been through hell and came out the other side scarred but standing. We both know what loss tastes like. We both know there are no guarantees. So we make the choice we can live with and take it one day at a time. And if it doesn't work, if we make this legal and then realize we've made a mistake, then we'll deal with it when it happens. But Caleb, I've spent the last week working beside you, living in your home, caring for your daughter. I've seen you at your worst, distant, grieving, barely able to look at me without flinching. And you know what? I'm still here. I'm still asking to stay. That should tell you something. It did tell him something. It told him that Evelyn Hartwell was either the bravest woman he'd ever met or the most desperate, and he honestly couldn't tell which. Maybe it was both. Maybe bravery and desperation looked the same when you were betting your entire future on a man who couldn't promise you anything. All right, he heard himself say. We'll do it. We'll get married. Evelyn let out a breath he hadn't realized she was holding. When? As soon as we can arrange it. No point in waiting. No point in waiting, she echoed, and there was something sad in the way she said it. Sad and resigned and realistic, like she knew exactly what kind of marriage this would be and had made her peace with it. They told Clara that evening after supper once Rose was in bed. Clara cried, but they were happy tears, tears of relief, and she hugged them both with fierce strength. I'm so glad, she said. So glad you're both brave enough to try. Then she immediately started planning, because that's what Clara did. They would marry in a week, she declared. Small ceremony, just family and a few neighbors. Reverend Marsh could perform it at the ranch house. She would make a cake, and Mrs. Henderson from the general store could bring flowers, and it would be simple but proper. Caleb let her talk, making plans around him while he sat silent and numb. This was happening. He was getting married again. To a woman he barely knew, for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. Anna, he thought. Anna, forgive me. But Anna was silent, as she'd been silent for 2 years, and Caleb was left alone with his guilt and his choice and the knowledge that he was about to change his life irrevocably. Later, after Clara had finally exhausted herself with planning and gone to bed, Caleb walked outside. The night was cool, the stars so bright and numerous they looked like holes punched in black fabric to let heaven shine through. He stood in the yard, hands in his pockets, trying to feel something other than numb dread. Couldn't sleep either. He turned. Evelyn stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her hair down for once, making her look younger and more vulnerable than she ever did during the day. Just thinking. Second thoughts already? About 100 of them. She came down the steps and stood beside him, both of them looking up at the stars. We don't have to do this, you know. If you've changed your mind, just say so. I'll leave, and there'll be no hard feelings. Where would you go? I don't know. Back to Boston, maybe, or somewhere else. There are other advertisements, other families looking for help. I'd figure something out. But you don't want to. No, she admitted. I don't want to. I want to stay here. I want to be Rose's mother and your partner and learn everything there is to know about running this ranch. But only if you want it too. A marriage that's just obligation and resentment isn't worth having. Caleb thought about that. Thought about the last 2 years of his life, the slow grinding misery of it. Thought about Rose growing up with a father who was more ghost than man. Thought about the ranch, crumbling at the edges because one person couldn't hold it all together alone. And he thought about Evelyn. This strange, brave woman who'd crossed half a continent to answer an advertisement from people she'd never met, who worked dawn to dark without complaint, who was patient with his daughter and honest with him and asking for almost nothing except a place to belong. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe suffering wasn't the same as loyalty. Maybe Anna would want him to keep going, to find some way to live instead of just exist. I want you to stay, he said quietly. I want you to be Rose's mother, and I want your help with the ranch, and I want... He paused, struggling for words. I want to try. I can't promise it'll be enough, but I can promise I'll try. Evelyn turned to face him, and in the starlight, her eyes were bright. That's all anyone can promise, that they'll try. They stood there for a moment, two people on the edge of something neither of them fully understood. Then Evelyn held out her hand, formal and deliberate, and Caleb took it. They shook, sealing their bargain the way business partners might, and somehow that felt more honest than any romantic gesture would have. 1 week, Evelyn said. 1 week. She went back inside, and Caleb stayed out under the stars a while longer, trying to convince himself he was doing the right thing. The week that followed passed in a blur of preparation. Clara threw herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that would have been touching if it wasn't so exhausting. Evelyn tried to help, but was clearly overwhelmed by the scale of Clara's ambitions. It's just a small ceremony, Evelyn said at one point, watching Clara make yet another list. It's your wedding day. It should be special. It's a practical arrangement. It doesn't need to be special. Clara looked up, her expression sharp. Every wedding deserves to be special, practical, or not. You're making vows, Evelyn, promises that will shape the rest of your life. That matters. Evelyn fell silent, and Caleb wondered if she was thinking the same thing he was, that vows made without love were just words. Empty words that would have to be filled with meaning later, through action and time, and whatever grace they could find in the daily work of living together. He went to town twice that week, once to speak with Reverend Marsh, and once to file the necessary paperwork at the territorial office. Both trips felt surreal, like he was watching someone else go through the motions of preparing for marriage while he floated somewhere above his own body. Reverend Marsh was kind but direct. I knew Anna, he said as they sat in his small office behind the church. She was a fine woman, and I know you loved her. But Caleb, she's gone. And this woman, Miss Hartwell, she's here, she's real. She's choosing you, even knowing you're still grieving. That deserves your respect, at the very least. I do respect her. Good. Then respect her enough to give this marriage a real chance. Not just going through the motions, but actually trying to build something together. That's what we're doing. Is it? Or are you just letting Clara have her way because it's easier than fighting? The question hit too close to home. Caleb shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. I'm here, aren't I? I'm showing up. That's more than I've done for anything in 2 years. Showing up is a start, but it's not enough. Marriage, any marriage, practical or passionate, requires more than just presence. It requires engagement, attention, the willingness to see your partner as a person and not just a solution to a problem. I see her as a person. Do you? Or do you see her as the answer to Clara's prayers and Rose's needs and the ranch's problems? Because there's a difference, Caleb, a big difference. And Miss Hartwell will know which one you're seeing. The words haunted Caleb on the ride home. Did he see Evelyn as a person, or just as a useful addition to his household? He thought about it. Thought about the way she'd learned fence mending and pasture management, the way she read to Rose every night with infinite patience, the way she drank her coffee with just a little sugar and always hummed when she thought no one was listening, the way she'd been brutally honest with him about her expectations and limitations. Maybe he did see her. Maybe he was starting to anyway. 2 days before the wedding, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Evelyn, and Caleb recognized the handwriting on the outside. Neat and masculine, with a Boston postmark. He handed it to her without comment, but she paled when she saw it. Who's it from? Clara asked. An old friend. Someone I knew before I left. Evelyn's voice was carefully neutral, but Caleb saw the way her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. She read it standing by the window, her face unreadable. When she finished, she folded it carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. Everything all right? Caleb asked. Fine. Just someone wishing me well. But she was distracted for the rest of the day, and that night Caleb heard her crying softly in her room. He stood outside her door for a long time, hand raised to knock, wanting to ask if she was all right, but not knowing if he had the right. In the end, he walked away. Whatever grief or regret that letter had brought her, it wasn't his business. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and hot. Clara woke everyone before sunrise, a woman possessed by the need to make everything perfect. She spent hours in the kitchen, baking the cake she'd promised and preparing food for the small gathering of neighbors who'd been invited. Evelyn moved through the chaos with quiet efficiency, helping where she could but mostly staying out of Clara's way. She'd borrowed a dress from Clara, nothing fancy, just a simple blue cotton that happened to fit well enough. No veil, no flowers in her hair, just her usual neat bun and a face scrubbed clean. Caleb dressed in his Sunday suit, the one he'd worn to Anna's funeral and had barely touched since. It smelled of mothballs and disuse, and when he looked at himself in the mirror, he saw a stranger, a man about to make vows he wasn't sure he could keep. Rose was the only one who seemed genuinely excited. She wore her best dress with the yellow ribbons and kept asking when the wedding would start and whether she could throw flower petals, even though Clara had explained 3 times that they didn't have flower petals. Why not? Rose demanded. Because it's not that kind of wedding, sweetheart. What kind is it then? Clara hesitated, and Caleb saw her struggling to explain their practical arrangement to a 6-year-old who still believed in fairy tales. It's a grown-up wedding, Clara said finally, where 2 people decide to be partners and help each other. Like Papa and Miss Evelyn? Exactly like Papa and Miss Evelyn. Rose seemed satisfied with that answer, which was more than Caleb could say for himself. The guests began arriving around noon. Tom and Sarah Henderson from the general store, the Yates from the boarding house, young Mary Sullivan, the schoolteacher, who blushed when she spoke to Caleb and looked at Evelyn with something like envy. A few other ranching families from the area, people Caleb knew but didn't particularly call friends. They gathered in the front room, which Clara had cleaned within an inch of its life. Reverend Marsh stood by the fireplace, his prayer book open in his hands. Rose sat on Clara's lap, swinging her legs with barely contained excitement. And Evelyn stood beside Caleb, her hands clasped in front of her, her face calm and composed, even though he could feel the tension radiating off her in waves. Dearly beloved, Reverend Marsh began, and Caleb felt the world narrow to this moment, this choice, this irrevocable step into an unknown future. The ceremony was short, traditional vows spoken clearly and firmly by both of them, promises to honor and cherish, to stay together in sickness and health, for better or worse. Words that sounded hollow in Caleb's mouth and probably sounded just as hollow in Evelyn's, but they said them anyway because that's what you did when you stood before God and neighbors and made a commitment. Do you, Caleb Monroe, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Evelyn Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory and Almighty God, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was awkward, brief, more obligation than affection. Caleb leaned in, pressed his lips to Evelyn's for the briefest possible moment, and then stepped back. Her eyes were wide and uncertain, and he wondered if she was regretting this already. But then everyone was clapping and congratulating them, and Clara was crying happy tears again, and Rose was tugging on Evelyn's skirt, asking if she could call her mama now. Evelyn looked down at Rose, and something in her expression softened. If you want to, sweetheart, but only if you want to. I want to. Rose threw her arms around Evelyn's waist. I want to call you mama. And just like that, it was done. Evelyn was no longer Miss Hartwell from Boston. She was Mrs. Monroe, Caleb's wife, Rose's mother, a permanent part of this family and this ranch, for better or worse. The celebration that followed was subdued by most wedding standards. They ate Clara's food and cake, and people made polite conversation, and a few of the men clapped Caleb on the back with knowing grins that made him want to punch something. Through it all, Evelyn smiled and thanked people for coming and played the role of bride with grace and dignity. But Caleb could see the strain in her eyes, the way she held herself too carefully, like she might shatter if she relaxed even a little. By late afternoon, the guests had all left. Clara took Rose to visit the Hendersons in town for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy with a meaningful look that made Caleb want to crawl under the porch and hide. And then it was just him and Evelyn, alone in the house for the first time as husband and wife. They stood in the kitchen, the silence stretching out between them like a canyon. Well, Evelyn said finally, we did it. We did. I should probably make supper. You don't have to. We could just have leftovers from the wedding. All right? They ate Clara's leftover chicken and cake, neither of them with much appetite. The sun set outside, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red, and Caleb felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him. This was supposed to be his wedding night. There were supposed to be things that happened on wedding nights, but those things required feelings he didn't have and intimacy he couldn't offer, and he had no idea how to navigate this particular minefield. I'll sleep in my room, Evelyn said abruptly, the one I've been using, unless you have other expectations. Relief flooded through him, sharp and immediate. No, your room is fine. This is a partnership, remember? We both agreed to that. I remember. I just wanted to make sure we were still in agreement. We are. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Good. Then I'll say good night, I suppose. It's been a very long day. Good night, Evelyn. She paused at the base of the stairs, one hand on the rail. Caleb? Yes? Thank you. For giving me a chance. For letting me stay. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I promise I'll do my best to be a good wife and mother. In whatever way I can be. I know you will. She went upstairs and Caleb sat alone in the kitchen, listening to her footsteps overhead, the creak of floorboards, the sound of a door closing softly. He was married. Again. To a woman he respected but didn't love, in a ceremony that felt more like signing a business contract than joining two lives. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like the right choice anyway. The first week of marriage felt like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. They were polite to each other. Carefully, painfully polite. Caleb said please and thank you for things that didn't require either. Evelyn asked permission before rearranging anything in the house, even small things that clearly needed rearranging. They moved around each other like dancers who'd never learned the same steps, trying not to collide, trying not to intrude on space that wasn't clearly theirs. Rose was the only one who seemed oblivious to the tension. She'd taken to calling Evelyn Mama, with the easy acceptance of a child who'd been given permission to want something she'd needed all along. She followed Evelyn everywhere, chattering away about everything and nothing, and Evelyn listened with the same patience she'd shown from the beginning. Watching them together did something complicated to Caleb's chest, made him feel grateful and guilty in equal measure. Grateful that his daughter finally had the maternal attention she'd been starving for. Guilty that he'd let her go so long without it. Clara had moved back to her own small house in town after the wedding, declaring that newlyweds needed privacy even if theirs was an unconventional arrangement. Her absence left a hole in the daily rhythm of the household, but it also forced Caleb and Evelyn to figure out how to coexist without a buffer. They established routines. Caleb woke before dawn and started the fire in the stove. Evelyn came down minutes later and made coffee so strong it could strip paint. They worked together in the kitchen, moving around each other with increasing efficiency, learning each other's patterns. Breakfast was usually quiet, just the necessary words about the day's work ahead. After breakfast, Caleb went out to handle the ranch work while Evelyn tackled the endless list of household tasks. But increasingly, she'd finish her indoor work by mid-morning and come find him, asking if she could help with whatever he was doing. "You don't have to work outside," he told her one morning when she appeared at the barn dressed in men's work clothes that Clara must have altered for her. "That's not part of our arrangement." "Our arrangement," she said, her tone mild but pointed, "is a partnership. Partners share the work, all of it. Besides, I'm going stir-crazy inside. I need to move, to do something that feels productive." So she worked beside him. Learned to muck stalls without gagging, to curry horses until their coats gleamed, to spot a lame animal before it went fully unsound. She had good instincts and better determination, pushing through tasks that would have defeated most city women. Tom Henderson remarked on it one afternoon when he stopped by to drop off supplies from the general store. "Your new wife's got sand," he said, watching Evelyn haul a bale of hay that was nearly as big as she was. "Most ladies from back east would have turned tail and run by now." "She's tougher than she looks," Caleb admitted. "Must be, to take you on." Tom grinned. "How's married life treating you?" "It's fine." "Just fine?" "Come on, Caleb, you can do better than that." But Caleb couldn't do better than that because fine was as accurate as he could be. The marriage was fine, functional. They operated like a well-oiled machine, each part doing its job, nothing grinding or breaking. But there was no warmth to it, no spontaneity, no moments of genuine connection beyond what was required to get through the day. At night, they retreated to separate rooms. Evelyn always went upstairs first, and Caleb waited a decent interval before following. Sometimes he heard her moving around, heard water pouring for washing, heard the soft creak of her bed as she settled in. He lay in his own room trying not to think about the fact that his wife was sleeping 20 feet away and might as well be on another continent for all the intimacy between them. 3 weeks into the marriage, the situation with the creek reached a crisis point. The trickle that had been barely sustaining the south pasture dried up completely, leaving the cattle with no water source. Caleb rode out at dawn to assess the damage and came back with a face like carved stone. "We have to move them," he told Evelyn over breakfast. "The whole herd, drive them to the North Range where the spring's still running." "When?" "Today. Tomorrow at the latest. Every hour we wait, we risk losing animals." "What do you need me to do?" He looked at her, surprised. "This isn't your problem to solve. We're partners, remember? You said it yourself. Your problems are my problems." She set down her coffee cup. "So tell me what needs doing." What needed doing was more than one person could handle alone. Caleb sent word to the few neighboring ranchers who owed him favors, and by mid-morning, 4 men showed up ready to help with the cattle drive. They were rough, weathered men who looked at Evelyn with open curiosity, the new Mrs. Monroe, the mail-order bride who'd married old Caleb after Anna died. Evelyn met their stares with level calm and asked what she could do to help. "You ever work cattle?" one of them asked, skeptical. "No, but I can learn." The man, Jack Peters, who ran a small spread to the east, laughed outright. "Lady, cattle drives ain't something you learn on the job. They're dangerous. Animals get spooked. People get hurt." "Then tell me how not to get hurt, and I'll do my best to follow instructions." Something about her tone must have impressed him, because Jack's laughter faded into grudging respect. "All right then, you can ride drag. Back of the herd, keep the stragglers moving. It's dusty and miserable, but it's the safest position for someone green." "Thank you. I'll do my best." Caleb wanted to object, wanted to tell her to stay at the ranch with Rose where it was safe, but they'd agreed to be partners, and partners trusted each other to hold up their end. So he just nodded and said, "Stay near Jack. If something goes wrong, listen to him." The drive began just after noon. And within an hour, Caleb understood why city folk romanticized cowboy life without ever having lived it. It was brutal work, hot, dusty, exhausting. The cattle were cantankerous after weeks of poor grazing and limited water, and they fought every step of the way. Caleb rode point with Jack, setting the pace and direction, while the other men worked the flanks, keeping the herd bunched together. Evelyn rode drag, just as Jack had assigned her, and Caleb kept glancing back to check on her. She was coated in dust within minutes, her face wrapped in a bandana, her borrowed hat pulled low. But she stayed in position, pushing stragglers forward, not complaining even though he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. They were halfway to the North Range when everything went to hell. Later, Caleb would try to piece together exactly what happened. A jackrabbit bolting from cover maybe, or a snake in the grass. Something spooked the lead steers, and spooked cattle are about as predictable as dynamite with a lit fuse. The front of the herd broke into a run, and panic rippled backward through hundreds of animals until the whole mass was moving too fast, breaking formation, scattering in all directions. "Stampede!" Jack shouted, and the word sent ice through Caleb's veins. He spurred his horse forward, trying to get ahead of the lead steers, trying to turn them before they ran themselves to death or trampled someone in the process. Beside him, Jack and the other men were doing the same, their horses foam-flecked and straining. And then Caleb remembered Evelyn. His head whipped around, searching for her in the chaos of dust and thundering hooves. He found her at the edge of the herd, her horse dancing nervously, and watched in horror as a knot of panicked cattle veered directly toward her. Evelyn! Her name tore out of his throat, but there was no way she could hear him over the noise. She saw them coming, though, saw the wall of muscle and horn bearing down on her, and made a split-second decision. Instead of trying to outrun them, which would have been suicide, she turned her horse sharply to the right toward a rocky outcrop that jutted up from the prairie floor. The horse lunged forward, carrying her away from the main thrust of the stampede, but not fast enough. A steer caught her horse's hindquarters with its horn, and the animal went down hard, throwing Evelyn from the saddle. Caleb saw her hit the ground and roll, saw her scramble to her feet and run for the rocks with cattle pounding the earth behind her, and something in his chest simply stopped working. He wheeled his horse around, cutting across the stampede at an angle that was reckless, bordering on suicidal. His gelding was good, was smart, knew how to navigate chaos, but even the best horse could only do so much. They wove through gaps that closed as soon as they'd passed through, dodging horns and hooves, and Caleb's world narrowed to one single purpose. Get to Evelyn. She'd made it to the rocks and was pressed against them, making herself as small as possible while cattle streamed past on either side. Her face was white with fear, but she wasn't screaming, wasn't panicking, just holding still and waiting for the thunder to pass. Caleb reached her seconds before a straggling bull would have crushed her against the stone. He leaned down from his saddle, grabbed her arm, and hauled her up behind him in one motion that would have been impossible if adrenaline hadn't made him temporarily superhuman. "Hold on!" he shouted, and felt her arms lock around his waist. They rode out of the mess together, his horse carrying double weight, but running like the devil himself was chasing them. The stampede rolled past, beginning to slow now as the lead steers ran out of steam, and finally they were clear, on the far side of the rocky outcrop with open prairie around them. Caleb reined in his horse and dismounted so fast he nearly fell. Evelyn slid down after him, and before he could think about what he was doing, he grabbed her shoulders and looked her over with frantic intensity. "Are you hurt? Did they hit you? Evelyn, answer me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." Her voice shook slightly but held. "I'm fine, Caleb. Just shaken." "You're bleeding." He pointed to a gash on her forearm, where she must have scraped against rock. "It's nothing. A scratch. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." She met his eyes, and something in her gaze made his hands tighten on her shoulders. "I saw them coming, and I got out of the way. That's all." "That's all? Evelyn, you—" His voice cracked, and suddenly all the fear he'd been holding back crashed over him like a wave. "You could have died, right in front of me, and I wouldn't have been able to do a damn thing to stop it. But you did. You rode into a stampede to get me out. That was incredibly stupid and incredibly brave. I couldn't—" He stopped, struggling for words that wouldn't come. "I couldn't let anything happen to you." Something shifted in her expression, softened. "Caleb, And then he was pulling her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with none of the careful distance he'd maintained for 3 weeks. She was solid and real and alive, her heart hammering against his ribs, her breath warm against his neck. He held her like she might disappear if he let go, and she held him back just as hard. They stood there for a long moment, two people who'd been living like strangers, remembering what it felt like to need someone and be needed in return. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb saw tears tracking through the dust on Evelyn's face, and he realized his own eyes were wet. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to scare you. You have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who brought you out here, put you in danger. You trusted me to help. That's not putting me in danger. That's treating me like a partner. There's a difference." In the distance, Caleb could see Jack and the others gathering the scattered cattle, getting the herd under control again. They'd want to finish the drive before dark, would need every available rider. But for this moment, Caleb couldn't make himself care about cattle or schedules or anything except the woman standing in front of him. "Your horse," he said, remembering. "We need to find your horse." They found the animal grazing calmly 100 yards away, limping slightly but not seriously injured. Evelyn's saddle had twisted, and there was a nasty scrape along the horse's flank, but nothing that wouldn't heal. By the time they rejoined the others, the cattle were moving again at a more manageable pace. Jack took one look at Evelyn, dusty, bleeding, shaking slightly, and his weathered face creased with concern. "You all right, Mrs. Monroe?" "I will be." "You've got grit. I'll give you that. Most folks would have frozen up, gotten themselves trampled. You did good, keeping your head." She smiled weakly. "I had excellent instruction on what not to do." They finished the drive without further incident, getting the herd settled on the North Range where water was still plentiful and grass still grew. By the time they rode back to the ranch house, the sun was setting and every muscle in Caleb's body ached. The men who'd helped with the drive declined an offer of supper, needing to get back to their own ranches. Jack was the last to leave, and he pulled Caleb aside before mounting up. "That wife of yours is something special," he said quietly. "Don't take too long figuring that out." "I know she is." "Do you? Because from where I was standing today, you looked like a man who'd just realized he might lose something he didn't know he had. That's a dangerous way to live, Caleb, dangerous for both of you." After Jack rode off, Caleb found Evelyn in the kitchen, washing the dust and blood from her arm. She'd stripped down to her chemise and work skirt, and in the lamplight he could see bruises blooming across her shoulders where she'd hit the ground. "Let me help." He didn't wait for permission, just took the cloth from her hand and gently cleaned the scrape on her forearm. It wasn't deep, but it was long, and it would scar. "Where's Rose?" Evelyn asked. "Still at the Hendersons. Clara's bringing her back tomorrow." His hands were shaking slightly as he worked. "You should rest. You've been through hell today. So have you. I'm used to it." "That doesn't mean you don't need rest, too." He finished cleaning her arm and wrapped it in clean linen. His hands lingered on her wrist longer than necessary, and when he looked up, he found her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming for me. You could have been killed. So could you. And that—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "That wasn't acceptable. The thought of you dying, of losing you—" "Caleb?" She put her free hand over his. "I'm here. I'm all right. We're both all right." But they weren't, not really. Something had cracked open today, some wall that Caleb had built to protect himself, and he didn't know how to put it back together. Didn't know if he wanted to. "I need to tell you something," he said abruptly. "All right? When I saw those cattle heading for you, when I thought I might lose you," he forced himself to meet her eyes, "I felt something I didn't think I could feel anymore. Terror, yes, but also—" The word stuck in his throat, refused to come out. "I care about you, Evelyn. More than I thought I could. More than I meant to." Her hand tightened on his. "I care about you too. That wasn't part of our agreement." "I know." A small, sad smile. "But it happened anyway. We can't choose what we feel, Caleb. Only what we do about it." "What do we do about it?" "I don't know. Keep going, I suppose. Keep being partners. Keep trying to build something real from this arrangement we made. And if feelings grow along the way, well, maybe that's not the worst thing that could happen. It should have felt like betrayal. Feeling something for a woman who wasn't Anna, caring about someone new when he'd sworn his heart died with his wife. But standing there in the lamplight with Evelyn's hand in his and the memory of almost losing her still raw and fresh, Caleb couldn't make himself feel guilty. He just felt grateful. Grateful she was alive. Grateful she was here. Grateful she'd had the courage to cross a continent and marry a broken man and face down stampeding cattle without losing her nerve. "I'm going to try," he said, "to be a real husband. Not just a partner, but someone you can count on for more than work and respect." "You already are that, Caleb. You rode into a stampede for me. That's not the action of someone just going through the motions." Maybe she was right. Maybe the feelings had been there longer than he wanted to admit, buried under grief and guilt, but growing anyway like grass through stone. That night, after Evelyn went upstairs, Caleb stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. Then he went to the small table where Anna's picture still sat, the only photograph they'd ever had taken, a year before she died. She was smiling in it, young and vital and so alive it hurt to look at. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the image. "I'm sorry if this feels like forgetting you. But I think maybe I need to keep living. And I think maybe Evelyn is how I do that." The picture didn't answer, of course, but standing there in the dark, Caleb felt something ease in his chest, like maybe Anna would have understood, like maybe she'd have wanted this for him, not to forget her, never that, but to find a way forward that didn't mean dying by inches. He left the picture where it was, but turned it slightly so it faced the wall instead of the room. A small gesture, but it felt monumental, like closing one door so another could open. The next morning, Clara brought Rose home and immediately noticed the change. She looked between Caleb and Evelyn, who moved around the kitchen with new ease, their hands brushing when they passed, their eyes meeting and holding, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Something happened," she said once Rose was outside playing. "Cattle stampede," Caleb said. "Evelyn nearly got trampled." Clara's smile disappeared. "Is she all right?" "She's fine. Bruised and scraped, but fine." "And you?" Clara's gaze was too knowing. "Are you fine?" Caleb looked at Evelyn, who was checking on the bread in the oven, humming softly to herself. "I'm getting there." "Good." Clara squeezed his shoulder. "It's about time." Over the next few weeks, the marriage transformed in small, almost imperceptible ways. They still slept in separate rooms, still maintained a physical distance that neither was quite ready to breach. But the emotional distance began to close. Caleb found himself talking to Evelyn about things beyond ranch business, about his childhood, his parents who died when he was young, his years building this ranch from nothing. And Evelyn talked about Boston, about teaching children who were too hungry to concentrate, about her parents and the sudden loneliness of losing them both at once. They laughed together for the first time over supper one night, when Rose told a story that made no sense but was delivered with such earnest conviction that neither adult could keep a straight face. The sound of Evelyn's laughter, real laughter, not polite amusement, did something to Caleb's heart. He started noticing things, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident, the fact that she sang when she was happy and went very quiet when she was worried. 100 tiny details that added up to a whole person, complex and real and worth knowing. And he caught her watching him too, her eyes following him when he worked, a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. Once, he looked up from fixing a broken fence rail and found her on the porch with Rose, and the look on her face, fond and warm and maybe a little bit odd, made him stumble over his own feet. "You all right?" she called. "Fine, just clumsy." But he wasn't fine. He was falling, slowly and terrifyingly, for his own wife. The woman he'd married out of practicality was becoming someone he couldn't imagine living without. One evening, about 6 weeks into the marriage, they sat on the porch after Rose had gone to bed. The summer heat had finally broken, and the night air was cool and sweet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and closer by, crickets sang their endless song. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said. "Of course." "That letter I got, right before the wedding, do you want to know what it said?" Caleb had wondered, but hadn't wanted to pry. Only if you want to tell me. It was from a man I knew in Boston, Charles Whitmore. We'd been, not engaged exactly, but there was an understanding that eventually we'd marry. She paused, her hands folded in her lap. He wrote to tell me I was making a mistake, that frontier life would ruin me, that I should come back to Boston where I belonged, that he'd be willing to overlook my temporary lapse in judgment if I returned immediately. Caleb felt something hot and possessive flare in his chest. What did you tell him? I didn't respond. What would I say? That I'd rather build a life with a grieving rancher in Montana than settle for a comfortable match with a man who thought he could overlook my choices? She turned to look at him. I made the right decision, Caleb. Coming here. Marrying you. I've never regretted it, even for a moment. Even when cattle were trying to trample you? A soft laugh. Even then. At least here, I know I matter. I know the work I do makes a difference. In Boston, I was just existing, taking up space. Here I'm building something, with you and Rose. Something real. Caleb reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact that wasn't necessary for work or safety, and he felt her surprise in the way her fingers tensed before relaxing into his grip. I'm glad you stayed, he said. I'm glad Clara wrote that advertisement. I'm glad you were brave enough to answer it. I'm glad... His voice roughened. I'm glad it was you. She squeezed his hand, and they sat there in the darkness, holding on to each other while the Montana night surrounded them with its vast, infinite sky. For the first time since Anna died, Caleb felt something other than pain when he thought about the future. He felt possibility. Hope. The fragile, terrifying belief that maybe broken things could be made whole again, if you had the courage to try. And sitting there with Evelyn's hand in his and the sound of her breathing steady beside him, Caleb finally understood what Clara had been trying to tell him all along. The past was gone, the future was uncertain, but the present, right now, this moment, this woman, was real and solid and worth holding on to. He just hoped he hadn't realized it too late. Summer surrendered to autumn with the reluctance of something that knew what was coming. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the prairie grass turned from green to gold to brown. Caleb had always hated this time of year, the slow march toward winter, toward the season that had taken Anna from him. But this year felt different. This year, he watched the leaves change and felt something other than dread. He felt grateful for the harvest that had been better than expected, for the cattle that had fattened on the North Range's good grass, for Rose, who was reading full sentences now thanks to Evelyn's patient teaching, for the woman herself, who'd somehow transformed from a desperate stranger into the center of his world without him quite noticing when it happened. They'd fallen into a rhythm that felt less like coexistence and more like partnership, real partnership, the kind that went beyond dividing chores and making polite conversation. They finished each other's sentences, anticipated each other's needs, worked side by side with the kind of unspoken coordination that only came from truly paying attention to another person. But they still slept in separate rooms, still maintained that final boundary, that last wall that neither of them seemed brave enough to breach first. It was Clara who finally called them out on it. She'd come for Sunday dinner, as she did most weeks now, and after the meal, while Evelyn was upstairs putting Rose to bed, Clara cornered Caleb in the kitchen. How long are you going to keep this up? She asked without preamble. Keep what up? This ridiculous dance. You and Evelyn circling each other like teenagers at their first social. For God's sake, Caleb, you're married. You clearly care about each other. What are you waiting for? Caleb focused on washing the dish in his hands. It's complicated. It's only complicated because you're making it complicated. That woman loves you. Anyone with eyes can see it. And unless I'm completely blind, you love her too. So what's stopping you? I don't... He stopped because denying it felt like lying. It's not that simple. Why not? Because Anna is dead. Claire's voice was sharp, cutting through his deflection. She's been dead for over 2 years, and she's not coming back. And she wouldn't want this, Caleb. She wouldn't want you holding yourself apart from a good woman because you think grieving her means staying frozen in place forever. I'm not frozen. I married Evelyn, didn't I? You married her the way people sign contracts, with duty and obligation and none of the heart that marriage actually requires. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being just duty, and you're too scared to admit it. The dish cracked in Caleb's grip. He stared at the two pieces, blood welling from where a sharp edge had cut his palm, and felt something crack inside him too. "I don't know how," he said quietly. "I don't know how to let her in without feeling like I'm losing Anna all over again." Clara took the broken dish from his hands and wrapped his cut palm in a kitchen towel. "You're not losing Anna by loving Evelyn. Anna is already gone. What you're doing is finding a way to keep living despite that loss. And that's not betrayal, Caleb. That's survival. That's being human. What if I can't give Evelyn what she deserves? What if I'm too broken?" "Then you tell her that. You be honest." "But Caleb, that woman rode into a cattle stampede for this family. She left everything she knew to build a life here. She deserves to know how you feel, broken pieces and all. And I think you'll find she's strong enough to handle them." Footsteps on the stairs announced Evelyn's return. Clara gave Caleb one last meaningful look before excusing herself, claiming an early morning the next day. After she left, the house fell into the comfortable quiet of evening settling in. Evelyn noticed his bandaged hand immediately. "What happened?" "Broke a dish. Just a small cut." She took his hand anyway, unwrapping Clara's hasty bandage to examine the wound properly. Her touch was gentle, clinical, but Caleb felt it everywhere. Felt the warmth of her fingers, the concentration on her face, as she cleaned and rebandaged the cut with supplies from the medical kit they kept in the kitchen. "You need to be more careful," she said. "I know." "Do you?" She tied off the bandage and looked up at him. "Because lately you seem distracted. Is something wrong?" This was his chance, the opening Clara had been pushing him toward. He could tell her the truth, that he was distracted because he couldn't stop thinking about her, couldn't stop noticing the way lamplight caught in her hair or the sound of her voice when she sang to Rose. That the boundaries they'd established felt less like protection and more like prison walls. But the words stuck in his throat, held back by 2 years of grief and guilt and fear. "Just tired," he said instead. "Been a long season." Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment maybe, or resignation, but she just nodded and released his hand. "You should rest then. Tomorrow's another early morning." That night, Caleb lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, hating himself for his cowardice, hating that he could face down stampeding cattle and brutal Montana winters, but couldn't find the courage to tell his own wife that he loved her. Because that's what it was. Love. Different from what he'd felt for Anna. Quieter, steadier, built on respect and partnership rather than youthful passion, but love nonetheless. And he was terrified of it. The next morning brought the first real cold snap of autumn. Caleb woke to frost on the windows and his breath visible in the unheated bedroom. When he came downstairs, Evelyn was already up, wrapped in a shawl, trying to coax the kitchen stove back to life. "Damn things being temperamental," she muttered, which was as close to cursing as she ever came. "Let me." He knelt beside her and together they got the fire going properly. Their shoulders brushed in the confined space, and Caleb was acutely aware of how close she was, how easy it would be to turn his head and kiss her. But he didn't. He just finished with the fire and stood up, putting distance between them. The day was filled with the kind of work autumn demanded, checking that the barn was properly sealed against coming winter, ensuring the cattle had adequate shelter, stockpiling firewood. Evelyn worked beside him without complaint, even though he could see she was cold, could see her hands were red and chapped despite the gloves she wore. Around midday, clouds rolled in from the north, heavy and dark and full of threat. The temperature dropped further, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of snow. "Storm coming," Caleb said, scanning the sky with practiced concern. "Big one, by the look of it." "How long do we have?" "Few hours, maybe. We need to get everything secured now." They worked with increased urgency, Rose helping where she could, carrying small tools and closing chicken coop doors. By mid-afternoon, the first snowflakes began to fall, tentative at first, then faster, thicker, until the air was white with them. "Inside," Caleb ordered. "All of us. Now." They barely made it to the house before the storm hit in earnest. Within minutes, the world beyond the windows disappeared behind a wall of white. The wind howled like something alive and angry, rattling the shutters and finding every tiny gap in the walls to push cold air through. Caleb built up the fire in both the kitchen stove and the parlor fireplace, creating pockets of warmth in the increasingly cold house. Evelyn made hot soup and coffee while Rose pressed her face to the window, watching the snow with wide-eyed wonder. "It's so beautiful," Rose breathed. "It's dangerous," Caleb corrected gently. "Beautiful, but dangerous. People get lost in storms like this, freeze to death 20 feet from their own front door because they can't see where they're going. But we're safe inside, right, Papa?" "We're safe." As evening fell, the storm intensified. The temperature in the house dropped despite the fires, and Caleb knew from experience it would only get worse. Montana blizzards could last for days, and this one had all the signs of being a bad one. They ate supper huddled near the kitchen stove. Then Evelyn took Rose upstairs to bed early, bundling her in every blanket they owned. When she came back down, her expression was worried. "It's cold up there, really cold. The heat doesn't rise well in storms like this. Wind pushes it back down." Caleb made a decision. "Rose should sleep down here tonight, near the fire. It'll be warmer." They brought down Rose's mattress and set it up in the parlor as close to the fireplace as was safe. Rose thought it was a grand adventure, sleeping downstairs like they were camping. Within minutes of settling in, exhausted from the day's work and excitement, she was asleep. Caleb and Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee to stay warm, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind sounded like voices screaming, and every so often something, a branch, debris, who knew what, slammed against the house with enough force to make them both jump. "I've never seen weather like this," Evelyn said quietly. "We had snowstorms in Boston, but nothing this violent. Welcome to Montana. Winter here doesn't ask permission. It just takes." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Is this how Anna died? In a storm?" Caleb's hands tightened around his coffee cup. He rarely talked about the specifics, found it too painful to revisit. But sitting here in the lamplight with the storm howling outside, the words came easier than they ever had. "It was January, cold like this, but clear. No storm. She went into labor early, and we knew immediately something was wrong. Too much blood, and she was so weak." His voice roughened. "The doctor was in town, 5 miles away, but I couldn't leave her to get him. And Clara was here, but she didn't know what to do. None of us did. Caleb, you don't have to..." Rose was born just before midnight, perfect and healthy and screaming her lungs out. And Anna, she held her for maybe 10 minutes, long enough to look at her, to give her the name we'd chosen, to tell me she loved us both. He had to stop, swallow hard. Then she just slipped away. Like she'd used everything she had to bring Rose into the world and had nothing left for staying in it herself. Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm so sorry. I was angry for so long. Angry at Anna for insisting on having the baby when we knew it was dangerous. Angry at God for taking her. Angry at Rose for surviving when Anna didn't. Angry at myself for not being able to save either of them from that choice." He looked up, met Evelyn's eyes. "And then you came. And you were so patient with all my anger and grief and broken edges. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being angry and started being grateful. Grateful? For Rose. For this ranch. For Clara, who refused to let me disappear completely." He squeezed her hand. "For you. For the fact that you were brave enough to answer an advertisement from strangers and strong enough to stay when staying meant dealing with a man who was half ghost." "You're not a ghost anymore," Evelyn said softly. "You're here, present. I've watched you come back to life these past months, and it's been..." Her voice caught. "It's been an honor to witness." Something in Caleb's chest broke open. Not painfully, but like ice cracking in spring, making room for something new to grow. "Evelyn, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago." Before he could continue, a tremendous crash came from outside, followed by the sound of splintering wood. They both jumped to their feet and ran to the window. Through the blowing snow barely visible in the darkness, Caleb could see that part of the barn roof had collapsed under the weight of snow and wind. "The horses," he said, already moving toward the door. Evelyn grabbed his arm. "You can't go out there. You'll get lost in the storm." The animals will freeze if that barn isn't secure. I don't have a choice. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Caleb Monroe, we are partners. That means we face danger together, remember? Her grip on his arm tightened. Besides, you'll need someone to hold the rope so you can find your way back. She was right, and they both knew it. People died in blizzards by wandering 10 feet from their door and never finding their way back. But the thought of Evelyn out in this storm, exposed to cold that could kill in minutes. If anything happens to you, nothing will happen. We'll be careful. We'll rope ourselves to the porch, and you'll go fix what you can, and we'll come right back. Together. There was no time to argue. Every minute they waited was another minute the horses and other animals were exposed to deadly cold. Caleb grabbed rope from the storage closet while Evelyn bundled herself in every warm thing she could find. He did the same, then checked on Rose, still sleeping peacefully near the fire, unaware of the crisis unfolding. They tied one end of the rope to the porch railing and the other around Caleb's waist. Evelyn would hold the middle section, staying on the porch while he made his way to the barn, the rope his only guarantee of finding his way back. The moment Caleb stepped off the porch, the storm hit him like a physical wall. Wind tore at his clothes, snow stung his exposed skin like needles, and the cold was so intense it hurt to breathe. He couldn't see more than a foot in front of him, couldn't hear anything but the screaming wind. He followed the rope and his memory of the yard's layout, counting steps, adjusting for the wind that tried to push him off course. Behind him, invisible in the white darkness, he knew Evelyn was holding the rope, being his anchor. The thought of her out there, even relatively safe on the porch, made him move faster. The barn was chaos. The partial roof collapse had let in snow and wind, and the animals were panicking. Caleb moved on instinct and experience, calming the horses first, then the other stock, moving them to the more protected stalls on the barn's far side. He worked with numb hands, his movements getting slower, clumsier, as the cold seeped into his bones. He tried to patch the worst of the roof damage with boards and canvas, knowing it wouldn't hold for long but hoping it would be enough until the storm passed. The work took longer than he'd planned, and by the time he finished, he couldn't feel his fingers anymore, couldn't feel his feet. He stumbled back toward where the rope should be and realized with dawning horror that he'd somehow gotten turned around. The barn was large, and in the darkness and chaos he'd lost track of which direction was which. The rope that should have been right there was nowhere he could find. Panic clawed at him. This was how people died in blizzards, losing their way, losing their rope, wandering until exhaustion and cold took them down. He shouted, but the wind swallowed his voice. He felt along the wall trying to find a landmark, anything familiar. Then he heard it. A bell. Someone was ringing a bell, the sound cutting through the storm's roar. Caleb turned toward it, stumbling through snow that was already knee-deep, and saw a faint light in the distance. Evelyn. She'd left the porch, was standing in the yard with a lantern in one hand and the dinner bell in the other, ringing it over and over despite the wind that threatened to tear it from her grip. She'd tied the rope around herself and come looking for him when he took too long to return. He staggered toward her, and when he reached her, she grabbed him with cold, stiffened hands and pulled him close. Together, following the rope, they made their way back to the house. The distance couldn't have been more than 50 feet, but it felt like miles. They fell through the door more than walked through it, collapsing on the kitchen floor in a tangle of rope and snow-covered clothes. Caleb's whole body shook with cold, his teeth chattering so hard he couldn't speak. Evelyn was in no better shape, her lips blue, her hands shaking violently. But Rose was still asleep by the fire, safe and warm, and they'd both made it back alive. "Stupid," Caleb managed through chattering teeth. "Could have died. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking you were lost." Evelyn's voice shook as badly as her hands. "I was thinking I just found you, and I wasn't about to lose you to a storm." They helped each other out of their frozen clothes, too cold for modesty to matter, too focused on survival to think about anything else. Wrapped in blankets, they huddled by the kitchen stove, pressed close together because shared body heat was the fastest way to warm up. Slowly, painfully, feeling returned to Caleb's extremities. His fingers burned as circulation returned, and his face felt like it was on fire. Beside him, Evelyn whimpered softly as she went through the same process. "Never do that again," Caleb said when he could finally form words. "Never risk yourself like that for me." "Then don't get lost in blizzards." "I'm serious, Evelyn. When I couldn't find the rope, When I thought I might not make it back, all I could think about was you and Rose alone in this house. You standing on that porch wondering if I was dead. I can't put you through that. And all I could think about, she said, turning to face him, was that I'd let you go out there alone, that I might never get to tell you. She stopped, bit her lip. Tell me what? That I love you. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for too long. I know that wasn't part of our agreement. I know you married me for practical reasons, and I accepted that. But Caleb, I love you. I've loved you for weeks now, maybe longer, and when I thought you might be lost out there, that I might never see you again, I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear the thought of you dying without knowing. Caleb stared at her, this woman who'd crossed a continent for him, who'd faced stampedes and blizzards without flinching, who was currently wrapped in a blanket looking half frozen and more beautiful than anyone had a right to be. I love you too, he said, and felt the truth of it all the way to his bones. I've been trying not to. Tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or respect or partnership. But it's love, Evelyn. I love you. And I'm terrified of it, terrified of losing someone again, but I love you anyway. She started crying, tears streaming down her still cold cheeks. Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, Evelyn Monroe. I love your courage and your stubbornness and the way you sing when you think no one's listening. I love how you are with Rose, how you've made this house a home again. I love that you came into a blizzard to save me, even though it was reckless and dangerous, and you could have died. I love you too, she whispered. So much it scares me. He kissed her then, finally closing that last distance between them. Her lips were still cold, but they warmed under his, and when she kissed him back, it felt like coming home after a long journey. It felt like forgiveness and hope and the promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn rested her forehead against his. We should check on Rose, she murmured. In a minute. First, there's something else I need to say. Caleb cupped her face in his hands. Anna will always be a part of me. My past, my first love, Rose's mother. I can't erase that, and I wouldn't want to. I know, I would never ask you to. But you, Evelyn, you're my present and my future. You're the one who brought me back to life, who gave me a reason to care about tomorrow again, and I want... He took a shaky breath. I want a real marriage with you, not just partnership, not just convenience. Everything, if you'll have me. I'll have you. She smiled through her tears, broken pieces and all. I'll have you, Caleb Monroe, for as long as you'll have me. Then I guess that's forever. They sat there wrapped in blankets and each other until the shaking stopped and warmth fully returned. Then they checked on Rose, who'd slept through the entire crisis, and built up the fires to keep the house warm through the rest of the storm. The blizzard raged for 2 more days. They spent that time together in the warm circle of firelight, playing games with Rose, telling stories, learning how to be a real family instead of just people living under the same roof. On the second night, after Rose was asleep, Caleb asked Evelyn a question that had been building in his mind. Why did you really answer Clara's advertisement? The truth. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Because I was lonely. Not just alone. Lonely in a way that made every day feel like drowning. I had no one who needed me. No purpose beyond surviving one more day. When I read Clara's letter, I saw a chance for something more. A child who needed a mother. A man who needed help. A place where I could matter. You matter, Caleb said fiercely. You matter so much, Evelyn. To Rose, to me, to this ranch. You're not just filling a need. You're everything. She turned to him, eyes bright with emotion. So are you, and that's what makes this work, I think. We both know what it's like to be broken. We both know what it's like to need someone and be needed. We don't have to pretend to be perfect for each other. Good, because I'm about as far from perfect as a man can get. Perfect would be boring anyway. On the third morning, the storm finally broke. Caleb woke to silence, profound, absolute silence after days of howling wind. He went to the window and found the world transformed. Snow blanketed everything in white so pure it hurt to look at, and the sky above was crystalline blue. the kind of blue that only came after storms. He and Evelyn ventured outside together, Rose between them holding both their hands. The snow came up to Caleb's knees in places, higher where it had drifted. The barn had survived, barely, and the animals were cold but alive. Around them, the prairie stretched white and endless, beautiful in the way dangerous things often were. "It's like a new world," Evelyn said softly. "It is a new world." Caleb looked at her, at Rose, at the ranch buildings half buried in snow. "For all of us." The weeks that followed were hard work, digging out, repairing damage, caring for stock stressed by the storm. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Caleb and Evelyn moved through the days with new ease, their partnership deepened by love acknowledged and reciprocated. And one night, 2 weeks after the storm, Evelyn came to Caleb's room instead of her own. She stood in the doorway, backlit by lamplight from the hall, and asked quietly, "May I come in?" "You never have to ask," he said, and meant it. She crossed to the bed and sat beside him, and for the first time, Caleb understood what it meant to be truly married. Not the ceremony or the paperwork, but this, the choice to be vulnerable with another person, to trust them with your whole self, scars and all. They came together gently, carefully, learning each other with patience and tenderness. There was no desperation, no rush, just two people choosing each other over and over in 1,000 small ways that added up to love. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Evelyn traced patterns on Caleb's chest and said, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I don't expect you to forget Anna. I don't want you to. She was important, and she'll always be Rose's mother. There's room in this family for her memory." Caleb pulled her closer, throat tight with emotion. "You're generous. I'm practical. And I love you enough to understand that the heart doesn't work like a ledger. You don't have to subtract old love to make room for new love. They can coexist." She was right. He could honor Anna's memory and build a future with Evelyn. Could be grateful for what he'd had and what he had now. Love didn't have to be singular or exclusive. It could be layered, complex, growing in ways he'd never expected. Winter deepened, but inside the ranch house, warmth flourished. Caleb and Evelyn settled into married life with the kind of comfort that suggested they'd been together for years instead of months. They worked side by side, raised Rose together, planned for the ranch's future with a shared vision. On Christmas morning, Caleb gave Evelyn a gift, a small wooden box he'd carved himself over the past weeks. Inside was a deed transferring half ownership of the ranch to her name. "You're not just my wife," he explained when she stared at the document with wide eyes. "You're my partner in every sense. This ranch is as much yours as mine. I want it legal." She threw her arms around him, crying and laughing at the same time. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did. You've earned it 100 times over. And besides," he kissed her forehead, "partners share everything, remember?" Later that day, after Rose had exhausted herself playing with her new rag doll and fallen asleep by the fire, Clara came for Christmas dinner. She looked at Caleb and Evelyn, sitting close together, hands intertwined, sharing private smiles, and raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said, "and to the courage it takes to try again." "To courage," Caleb echoed, looking at his wife. "And to the people brave enough to give broken things a second chance." Spring came eventually, as it always did in Montana. The snow melted, the creek ran full again, and green pushed up through the brown grass. Caleb stood on the porch one morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Evelyn, coming to join him as she did most mornings now. She wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her head against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different everything is from a year ago. How I was barely surviving, barely human. How you changed all of that." "We changed it together. You let me in. That took as much courage as anything I did." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I want to tell you something I've never said to anyone." "All right." "When Anna died, I died too, or I thought I did. I thought that was it, one great love in a lifetime, and when it was gone, you just existed until your body caught up with your heart. But you taught me I was wrong. You taught me that the heart is big enough for multiple loves. that second chances aren't betrayals, that broken things can be made useful again. He paused, searching for the right words. You saved me, Evelyn, you and Rose. You gave me back my life. You gave me a life worth living, she countered. In Boston, I was just existing. Here, with you, I'm alive. Truly alive. They stood there as the sun climbed higher, warming the cold Montana morning, and Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, Anna's loss would always be a scar on his heart, but the presence of something good enough to balance it. Behind them, inside the house, Rose began to stir. They heard her calling for Mama, and Evelyn smiled. That's my cue, she said, starting toward the door. Caleb caught her hand, pulled her back for a long, sweet kiss. I love you, Mrs. Monroe. I love you too, Mr. Monroe, more than I have words for. She went inside to tend to their daughter, theirs now, in every way that mattered, and Caleb stood on the porch a moment longer, taking in his ranch, his land, his life. A year ago, this place had been a graveyard of memories and broken dreams. Now it was a home again, full of laughter and love and the daily miracle of people choosing each other. The rancher who'd thought his heart died with his first wife had learned to love again. The mail-order bride who'd come west out of desperation had found purpose and belonging. Together, they'd built something neither could have built alone, a family forged not by blood, but by choice, by courage, by the simple act of showing up every day and trying. From barren ground, green things had grown. From broken hearts, love had bloomed. And in the big Montana sky that held both storms and sunshine, both loss and renewal, Caleb Monroe had finally found his way home. Not to the past, which was gone forever, but to the present. To Evelyn and Rose and the life they were building together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but standing there in the morning light with the sound of his family inside and the promise of all his tomorrows ahead, Caleb understood that the best things never were. Sometimes the greatest love stories weren't about finding your other half. They were about being broken and choosing to heal, about being lost and finding your way back to yourself through someone else's faith in you. The mail-order bride from Boston had brought more than just her labor and her skills. She'd brought hope. She'd brought light. She'd brought the possibility that even the most damaged hearts could learn to beat again. And Caleb, the rancher who'd learned to love again, finally understood what Anna would have wanted all along. Not for him to stop living when she died, but to keep going, to find joy where he could, to be the father Rose needed and the man he could still become. Under the wide Montana sky, where second chances bloomed like wildflowers after rain, where broken ranchers and brave women built futures from the pieces they had left, Caleb Monroe smiled. And for the first time in 2 years, when he thought of tomorrow, he didn't feel dread. He felt ready. The two HTTPs www.youtube.com/watch v KX54E8VUY. So, here's a cinematic American-style 5-part dramatic summary of a heartbroken rancher finds love with a mail-order bride. Rewritten to be tight, 350 words, with fresh character names and a full emotional arc that ends cleanly. No continuation needed. Title: The Rancher Who Learned to Love Again. 1. Opening: The Ghost of a Family. Lost Montana Territory, 1882. Rancher Caleb Monroe sat on his porch staring at empty fields and emptier days. His wife, Anna, had died giving birth. His daughter, Rose, was all he had left. The ranch had turned to dust, and so had his hope. His sister-in-law, Clara, finally acted, writing east for help. Her letter spoke of a widower too proud to ask and a little girl who needed a mother's touch. 2. Rising Action. The Woman from the East. In Boston, Evelyn Hartwell, a soft-spoken woman with more heart than fortune, found Clara's letter and saw in it a chance at purpose. She answered, boarded a westbound train, and crossed half a continent to meet a man who didn't believe he deserved love. When she stepped off at Dry Creek Station, Caleb stood waiting, hat in hand, his eyes shadowed by grief. She smiled anyway, and that smile was the first light he'd seen in 2 years. Mod 3. Climax. Walls and wildfire. Life on the ranch tested her. The work was rough, the nights lonelier than letters had prepared her for. Caleb stayed distant, haunted by guilt. But Evelyn found her way through Rose, teaching her songs, baking bread, filling the house with laughter again. Just when peace returned, an Eastern suitor from Evelyn's past arrived, calling her home. That same night, lightning struck the ridge, and a brush fire raced toward the ranch. 4. Resolution. Trial by flame. Caleb and Evelyn fought side by side, beating back the fire through smoke and fear until dawn broke over blackened ground. When the danger passed, she collapsed, coughing but alive, Rose clinging to her. Caleb knelt beside them, tears cutting clean lines through the soot. "You could have run," he whispered. "I found something worth staying for," she said. Tots. 5. Breakthrough and ending. A second sunrise. Weeks later, amid charred fields sprouting green again, they wed on the porch where sorrow once lived. No music, only wind through wheat and a little girl's laughter. Caleb took Evelyn's hand and said, "You didn't just save my home. You gave it back its heart." And under the wide Montana sky, the broken rancher and the brave stranger began a life rooted in the quiet miracle of second chances.